Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I still remember the heat cranking out of the vents when I slid into my cruiser that January night. It was January 14th, 2006, and I'd been working these West Texas graveyard runs since '92. So, for me, this one felt like any other. The fluorescent bulb in the precinct's bay flickered once as I pushed the door shut, and my reflection wavered in the glass. Same badge, same uniform, same 10-year knot in my gut. Name's Ramirez, Corporal John Ramirez, with the Texas Department of Public Safety, stationed out of Presidio County. I was married back then, had 2 kids sleeping under blankets at our place in El Paso. I'm pretty sure I pulled away from the station at 1:12 a.m., maybe a minute or two later. Time stops, meaning something once you spend enough nights alone on the road. The heater hissed in protest against the desert cold, but the wind rattled the doors anyway, whispering through gaps around the windshield. Everything out there was black, but for those weak streetlights and the occasional sign that flickered like a dying thought. I punched my mobile out. No bars. That was normal, desert terrain. Then I keyed the mic. Ramirez to dispatch, leaving station for first check at the Silver Spur truck stop. The static warble in response might have been a relief back then. At least, I knew someone was listening. I eased out onto Highway 67, the road lit by a half-dead glow of highway reflectors. Crickets chattered against the dashboard, and a CB channel hissed broken words as I slid into the pumping lane of the truck stop 20 minutes later. Only 2 18-wheelers idled under the high canopy, their engines fuming steam. I parked between them with about a car's length on each side. Inside, the joint was covered in yellow light, a diner counter with chipped Formica top, dusty floor tiles, a lone waitress rubbing her knuckles as she wiped coffee rings off a table. I stepped inside, boots echoing, and she nodded without looking up. Usually, I'd shoot the breeze, ask about the night, maybe anything suspicious, like if some stranger had pulled in. Not this time. She glanced up, ran her hand through a thick braid of graying hair. "Quiet," she said. Then her lips curled. But that's when things happen. I nodded, not sure if she was talking about this place. I ordered coffee, black. She poured it slow, steam rising in lazy rings, and watched me. I felt like her stare had weight behind it, heavy, patient. I asked if she'd seen any odd vehicles on the road. She shook her head and slid a mug toward me. "All I know is check your 6, she said. I tipped my hat and walked back out. The next call on my sheet popped up around 2:15 a.m. Someone reporting headlights on a Chevy Impala stranded near mile marker 338, just east of Marfa. The caller said the car's engine was off. No one in sight, headlights still glaring like eyes. A standard check. I drove back onto Highway 90, dashboard GPS blinking on and off. Desert stretched on either side. Flat expanse, little but brush and scrub brush, the occasional silhouette of a mesquite. The night felt too still. My headlights cut a tunnel through it, but I swear I saw movement at the edge of the beam, something slinking behind a barbed wire fence. I hit the brakes. Nothing. Just mesquite branches quivering where no breeze was supposed to be. I breathed deep, cursed myself for spooking out over nothing. I pulled onto the shoulder. 15 miles of nothing had led me to that point. No signs for Marfa, no other cars on the road. The Impala sat at the Hardin Junction turnout, half on pavement, half on dirt. Its headlights were on, low beams, illuminating the guardrail ahead. I shut off my cruiser, no patrol car echo, just the gentle hiss as the engine cooled. The Impala's lights flickered with a faint hum. I switched on the spotlight, aimed it down the highway, nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, pressed the button so it clicked on, and approached the passenger side. I remember leaning in. No heat, no sign of movement. The front seat was empty. Cup holders held 2 styrofoam cups, both toppled. A backseat jacket lay slung over a headrest. I called dispatch. Corporal Ramirez. I've got an Impala at mile marker 338. Lights on, no one inside. I'm going to check the trunk. The only reply was static. Probably they'd file it and go back to sleep. I knelt, unlatched the trunk. The click echoed off the desert silence. When the lid lifted, I half expected to see a kid inside, passed out. Maybe Test drove far too drunk. But it was empty. Only a set of muddy work boots. Women's or men's, I couldn't tell. I ran my fingers along the boots' laces. They were caked in mud, desert clay. No footprints led away from the car, no scuff marks. Like someone had materialized the boots inside and then vanished. I closed the trunk and turned to lock it, but the Impala's lights stayed on. I radioed again. Dispatch, the trunk's clear, just boots. No license and glove box, tags expired. I paused. Felt a weight behind my own words, like saying them might give the night too much power. My flashlight danced over the quarter panel. Then I saw it. A faint outline on my dash cam when I would later review the footage. Just a second. A blur of what looked like a cowboy hat rim at the corner of my eyesight. But in that moment I saw nothing. I scanned the dirt beyond the guardrail. No tracks, no silhouette. Nothing but that heavy darkness, the desert breathing. I stood, closed the Impala's door. Warmth poured off the engine block. I paused with one hand still on the door handle, turned and ran the beam of my flashlight across the lonely road. As I did, the car's low beams buzzed and dimmed. You'd swear it was the Impala breathing. I shook it off, chalked it up to a wiring fault. Flipped the lights off, locked the doors, and radioed for a tow. Then I climbed back in my cruiser and drove off. Back on Highway 90, the night still offered no answer. My headlights caught a flicker of something in my review mirror. Maybe just a piece of trash catching reflection. But my heart was beating like crazy, a sensation I hadn't felt since my first year on patrol. I thought, keep going, just another call. I pointed my cruiser toward Presidio County, but as I did, the CB crackled. A voice cut through static, too low to understand. I tapped the mic. Ramirez to dispatch, do you copy? Silence. Just the hiss crackle. The temperature gauge dropped to the desert low teens. I switched on heat, pressed my palms against the wheel. My bones ached from tension. I replayed the dash cam image in my head. No cowboy hat, no blurry shape. Just me believing something was there. Back at the station by 3:47 a.m., I told the sergeant. Just a stranded car, no one around, boots in the trunk. He nodded and leaned back, asking if I was good. I said I was fine, just the night. He told me to file the report and head home to catch some sleep. I sighed, took my cruiser keys, and realized my daughter Mia would wake soon for her school bus if I stayed the night in the cruiser. Instead, I filled out the forms. Mileage, location, description, no victims, no suspects. I left out the odd detail of the Impala's headlights buzzing, like they'd wanted to stay on. I checked out at 4:10 a.m. and drove back toward El Paso. My mind reached for anything else to think about. Mia's school play next week, my wife Carmen's day shift at the hospital, but the silence inside my skull consumed me. I imagined that image from the dash cam, just a frame out of place, and wondered who it belonged to, if anyone. I stopped at a red light outside Van Horn and stared out the window at the dunes beyond the road. My reflection stared back, familiar, tired, losing its color under the stale street lamp. I thought, just another night. But the memory clung to me. When I pulled into my driveway at 5:02 a.m., the world was pastel, pre-sunrise pink leaking over the horizon. I parked, and for a second I forgot where I was. The world seemed too large, too empty. Then I saw my daughter's curtains flutter under the bedroom window. My breath caught. I watched that silhouette rise and fall. I forced myself to step out, but every muscle protested. I thought maybe I should have calmed down, chalked it up to desert heat and too many nights alone. Still, when I swung the front door open, I peeked at the living room. Mia's sneakers lay by the sofa, her blankie on the floor, everything normal. I grabbed my jacket off the back of a chair and tried to smile for her sake. I picked up Mia's blanket and draped it over her sleeping form. She stirred, grumbled, then curled back into sleep. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I sat beside her for a moment, ran a finger through her hair and whispered, "Daddy's here." I wondered how long I could keep things that way, how long the night's shadow would stick to my neck. My wife's car was already gone. No note on the counter, just the hum of the air conditioner. I headed inside to try to sleep, but the bed felt like a bench in the station, firm, uninviting. I lay there, staring at a ceiling I knew by heart, thinking about empty car trunks and vanished figures. That was my first taste of that night's poison. A question lodged in my chest. Who was it that stood behind me? And more importantly, why couldn't I shake the feeling they hadn't left? Hours later, I'd hear that dispatch channel again. This time on a private frequency, a voice warbled in a tone like wind through barbed wire. "Don't come alone." I nearly dropped the phone. I tried to respond, but the line was dead. I'd driven back out to the Impala, searched the desert right into sunrise, found nothing. By the time the sky bled full light, I was already thinking how I would report it. Interference on unknown channel. No actionable intel. But when I walked into the station, the sergeant shook his head. "No such transmission on any of our radios," he said. I gave a short nod, clipped my badge, and left it at that. I wrote nothing else in that file. But I drove home reckoning that I might never write it down anywhere. There were things you just didn't put on paper. Things you sheltered from your family. The hours until shift 2 felt like a montage of coffee sips and paper shuffling. By afternoon, I was shell-shocked, waiting for the next run. I didn't sleep. I cradled my coffee mug like it might anchor my bones to the ground. When the sun dipped behind the Davis Mountains, I figured I'd try again, hit the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. stretch, hoping the night might forget about me. But deep down, I knew some nights don't end. Some nights keep following you, even when it's light out. Even when you change shirts or unclip your badge. They stick to the inside of your eyeballs, waiting for midnight. I'd discovered that much already. The next run started without fanfare. I was back in uniform at 9:45 p.m., leaning against my cruiser in the Precinct 8 parking lot. I felt like I'd aged 10 years in 24 hours. My bones ached where they never ached before. Knees, elbows, shoulders. But someone had to do it. The DPS pays for the heat. Son of a bitch also pays for nightmares. The sergeant handed me those little folded sheets of manuscript paper. Assignments. Check on a 24-hour Sinclair station outside Alpine. Then swing by the Crockett Ranch turnout on Highway 385. That ranch was owned by a family that ran cows out on the plain. They hadn't been robbed, but the old-timers called in suspicious lanterns lighting up at the edge of their fields at 3 a.m. No one ever there, no campers, no farmhands. Local legend, I shrugged it off. But I remembered how that waitress at the Silver Spur had said, "Quiet is when things happen." My mind replayed that. I pulled out onto FM 170 toward Alpine. At around 10:50 p.m., I passed Fielding Pump Jack number 27, an idle oil platform standing like a sentinel against the sky. Wind kicked dust across the frontage road, rattling the chain-link fence. I felt the whisper of desert air push past my windows when I stopped at the Sinclair, a green-lined sign flickering half on, half off. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed like an alarm. One clerk, young guy, loping behind the counter. I asked if he'd had any trouble. He shook his head. When I poked at the conversation, he said, "Just the usual drunks, sir." I told him thanks, pushed off. But as I walked to my cruiser, I saw footprints in the dirt. Didn't match the boots of the men pumping gas. These were big, wide, like cowboy boots, leading east into the night. I radioed for a K9 unit. Need a track on possible trespasser. The handler said 5 minutes. I waited, hands in pockets, eyes on the prints. They stopped at the edge of the lot, like someone vanished into thin air. I followed with my flashlight. Nothing but flat desert, brittle creosote, and a moon that seemed to hang in the wrong place. I took a photo of the prints with my phone. When I zoomed in, I noticed scuff marks, almost paint-like, a light gray streak across both boot treads. No idea what that meant then. The sergeant told me to keep it in the file, so I bagged that up too, labeled evidence, though I doubted the lab would find much on desert clay. By 12 a.m., I headed to Crockett Ranch Turnout. I passed Little Horse Creek, dried up, nothing but cracked mud and rattlesnake holes. As I crested the rise, I saw a trailer house off in the dark, one lit window facing the road. The rest of the place was black. I pulled in, shut off the lights, didn't want to startle anyone if they had guests. I stepped onto the gravel, radio in hand, and heard a low hum, like a generator somewhere out of sight. I glanced at my watch, 12:17. No weather advisory for generators, but the hum was definitely mechanical. I walked around the side of their fencing, heard static on my radio. Someone keyed the mic, but nothing came through. I called dispatch. Corp. Ramirez, checking the Crockett Turnout. Generator or no generator here? Silence. I circled the trailer. On the porch, a tin coffee mug sat on a step. Inside it, greenish liquid. Some hadn't been touched in a while. I patted my tasers, made myself look big, and rapped on the door. 2 solid raps. Nothing. I tried the door handle, unlocked. I stepped inside. Faint creaking from the wood floorboards echoed. The hum was louder. I scanned the small living area. Leather sofa, wood stove cold and filled with ash. On the wall, a calendar dated March 2005. Pictures of longhorn steers. Kitchen smelled like old grease. I followed the hum into the hallway, where I saw a door slightly ajar. Behind that, a generator engine idled, fumes pooling near the ceiling. No one around. I called out, "Anyone home?" No answer. Then I saw graffiti carved into the kitchen door's paint. "He sees you." Letters scratched deep, blackened with paint or oil. My pulse kicked. I refrained from breathing, just pressed harder on the handle. It swung open into a small bedroom. A single mattress, no sheets. A radio on the floor, dial turned to a private CB channel. Channel Sembilan. Satu-Satu, I recognized that from before. Static buzzed through its speaker. I lifted the set, turned the knob, no sound. Somehow I felt the radio was watching me. A back window rattled. I spun, nothing but thick brush outside. But that rattling grew louder, like wind stuck in a funnel. I stepped toward the window, peered out. Nothing. No tire tracks, no boot prints. I radioed dispatch. Graffiti generator CB on 0911. No one present. The sergeant sounded clipped. Copy. We'll send backup morning. I backed out, shutting the door softly. Then I saw a shadow move in the comb parallel to the stove, like someone perched by the rafters. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. Just a patch of circling darkness. That sense of being watched crawled over my neck. I got in my cruiser and drove away. My next stop was a little one-stop in Marathon, where I called in around 1:45 a.m., just to get the last checkpoint. But that impromptu detour into Crockett Ranch left me unsettled. Brought back that same ache from the Impala incident. When I pulled into Marathon, the clerk asked if I wanted her to wait on anything. I nodded, scribbled my info in the logbook at the counter. Footsteps behind me. A tall man in faded jeans and a flannel shirt stood by the door. His sunburned face was crisscrossed with lines. Looked like he'd lived in a truck cab for too long. He said, "Officer, saw you pull up. You're looking for something?" I shook my head. "Just making rounds. Everything okay here?" He took a drag of a cigarette, eyes flicking to my badge. "Nothing I've seen," he said. Then he pointed. "But that old barn by Studer's Creek, you know it?" "Heard some hollering out there at 2 this morning." I stared. The barn was miles back behind the highway, abandoned. Everyone told ghost stories about it. How in the 50s, some rancher shot his wife there and left her body stacked with hay. Kid lore, I thought. Yet the first time someone told me I was already chasing boots in empty spaces. I told him thanks, walked outside. The night air was frigid, even though it was mid-January. I saw my breath curling in small, quick loops. I scanned the horizon. Nothing but sky so black it felt like a blanket you could drape over your mind. I got in my cruiser and headed west toward Presidio, retreading the same ribbon of highway I'd followed in the early shift. At around 2:50 a.m., my scanner crackled. "Any unit near Valentine? Private channel only." Code 9. That hush on the other end felt like the breath in a coffin, dead sure about nothing. I grabbed the handheld mic. "Ramirez here. Valentine? That's 200 miles east." The radio clicked as though I'd summoned something. I tuned to channel. 086-no traffic. Back to chapter 091 for private calls. Silence, save for a ghostly hiss. I switched back to patrol channel. Nothing. I figured some kid had clued into my call sign and was playing games. But that phrase, Valentine, Code 9 dash it rang in my head. Funny how 15 years of night shifts teaches you when to dismiss things and when to file them away. I clipped the mic back and drove on. Sun peeked over the horizon just after 5 a.m. when I finally radioed the station. "Corporal Ramirez, clear on final checkpoint." No incidents. But I remembered the barn, the graffiti, the generator inside that trailer, and the hush of that private call. My words felt flimsy in the air. Once I parked, I went inside the break room, poured coffee strong enough to cut grease. I stared out the window at the sunrise creeping through the desert haze. I thought about my wife's voice, her gentle scolding for bringing so many coffee cups home, my daughter's laugh when I finally sleep in on weekends. I remembered the first scar I got on my elbow, stitches from a bar fight at 19. That seemed trivial now compared to what I'd just seen in the field. I wrote the report, Crockett Ranch, suspicious private channel broadcast, graffiti, he sees you. generator idling with no one around. I left out the feeling of a watchful gaze on my back. I left out the eastbound footprints at the Sinclair. I left those in memories where they'd fester. At roll call, the lieutenant asked if I was okay. I nodded and said, "All good." He said, "Get some rest today." I said I would, though I had no idea whether there was any rest left for me. That night, I went home early. My daughter Mia's school play had been rescheduled, and my wife insisted I skip midnight chores. I didn't argue. I saw the unmade breakfast dishes still on the counter from yesterday, cereal stuck to the bowl. I slid my boots off by the door, rewarded my aching feet with socked relief. I found my daughter asleep on the couch, still wearing the clothes from school, a pink heart shirt and jeans. I laid a blanket over her and thought about how much I loved that kid. I kissed her on the head, turned away. My eyes caught a sticky note on the fridge. "Daddy, love you, Carmen." Sunshine yellow, curved handwriting. It should have comforted me. Instead, I folded it into my palm. It felt as if something had tried to squeeze my heart in two. I lay in my bed, watching bills pile on the nightstand. There was a framed photo of my family, my wife, my 2 kids, smiling by a pool in California from 2 summers back. I stared at that picture until the curve of the frame blurred. I felt like I was looking at someone else's memories. Sleep didn't come. I drifted into half-waking nightmares. Visions of a lone figure flickering at the edge of my cruiser's beam, breathing on my neck. By 10:15 p.m., it was nearly pitch black. I set my headlights on low beam and drove south on US 385 toward Chizos Basin. My route took me past the same stretches I'd worried over earlier: dried creek beds, shuttered ranch houses, a scattering of mesquite. My hands gripped the steering wheel through cracked leather, knuckles white. The radio sat silent beside me as if holding its breath. The moon had not risen yet. Darkness in Big Bend County is the kind that hugs you, seeps into your bones. I reminded myself to stay calm. I'd been doing this for 14 years. Only now, I felt like a freshman again, every hair on my neck standing up. My assignment wasn't specific. The lieutenant had said, "Keep an eye on the old Hayes place. 3 nights ago, a deputy reported a spotlight flickering there at 2 a.m. No one on record staying in that house, though. Could just be locals messing around. The Hayes place was a mile west off FM 170 on a dirt road, so narrow my cruiser's tires kicked up plumes of dust that nearly consumed my rear view. I could have sworn I recognized that spurt of dirt from my run earlier in the day, but this time I slowed to a crawl. Nothing in my rearview mirror. I saw boot tracks heading west toward a tank well, like someone had crept off that property. I held my breath. I cracked my window, air colder than I expected, scent of dry grass and cattle manure. The ranch house sat up on a slight rise where a dirt drive spanned 4 cattle guards. Boards were warped, windows boarded. A rusted tin roof sagged in the middle. The walls leaned as though the house were settling into the earth. 2 oil drums lay at one corner, half filled with sand and junk. I killed my cruiser lights, stepped onto the cold ground with boots that sank into frozen mud. My badge caught faint moonrise itched by the clouds. The ranch felt deserted, a tomb for old promises. I clicked my flashlight. Light sliced through the air, found only warped stew. I saw animal skulls half buried near the side of the house, a rusty plow handle, a dented propane tank. I followed the trail of boot tracks to the front door. Graffiti on the boards read, "They watch in silence." Words scratched in ragged letters, filled in with tar. Tension choked at my throat. I knocked firmly on the board, 3 light raps. My knuckles stung where the wood splintered. No answer. I turned the knob, still locked from the inside. I returned to my cruiser, pulled up a worn leather notepad, and scribbled, "Boarded property, unexplained graffiti, boot tracks to tank," in spidery handwriting. As I slid back into my cruiser, the radio buzzed. "Ramirez. Anyone else on FM 389? We're getting odd chatter." It came through my earpiece like static teeth grinding. I moved the dial, nothing but hissing. The lieutenant's voice floated in on the sheriff's channel instead. "We lost Harris 2 nights ago, out near highway frontage, adjacent to the Big Hat Ranch. Deputy Mark Harris. That was the guy who vanished." I nearly dropped my flashlight. I keyed the mic. "I copy, Lieutenant. Any leads on his last known?" His reply was clipped. "Harris called in a welfare check. His cruiser found idling at 2 a.m., shifting in park, lights on. No one around. I'll send you the detail sheet." My chest constricted. I drove off the dirt road back to FM 170, lights on low. I rolled east, feeling the ranch house's silhouette shrink behind me. I thought of those skulls, the phrase, "they watch in silence." I shook my head. How'd he end up by Big Hat? That was on the other side of Marathon. Storming winds hammered my cruiser as I turned onto US 385 southbound. The prairie lay flat here, nothing but rattlesnake grass and occasional yucca. At 1:12 a.m., I saw another pair of boot prints on the shoulder, fresh, heading west. I tapped the brakes, got out, and crouched. My flashlight showed cowboy boot treads, identical to those at the Hayes place. I clicked my phone camera. The prints vanished into thorny brush. I tried Harris's radio channel. Dead. I keyed my mic on patrol. "Ramirez to dispatch. Found Harris's cruiser. Found boot prints. Repeat, bloody boot prints." Nothing but static. For a moment, the desert seemed suspended, 2 pounds away from becoming a coffin. That's how you realize how alone you are out here. I backpedaled into my cruiser. My chest felt raw. I tried to call my sergeant on the phone. It rang once, then went dead. At 2:06 a.m., I decided I needed backup, so I called on the satellite phone. Painful delay between rings. Finally, a sleepy dispatcher took my call. I asked for Harris's last known GPS ping. They gave me coordinates, just a line on the map, something like 10 miles east of Highway 62, near location labeled Old Pringle Barn. My gut nodded. I drove in that direction as fast as I dared, lights blazing. The map said it took me down a gravel road off FM 170. I turned right, dust choking in the beam. I imagined Harris's face in that cruiser. Eyes wide, clutching the wheel. Where was he now? I gripped the wheel harder, pressed the accelerator. By 2:43 a.m., I reached that barn. Wind buffeted my cruiser, slapping my door. I saw the outline, long pine beams, rotted floorboards, roof-missing cans of rust. I killed my lights, stood there listening, just my boots stomping dust. I stepped inside. My flashlight cut through darkness. Cattle bones draped on a broken fence, old feed sacks rotting, spider webs the size of blankets. Tattered poster of a rodeo queen from '82 tacked to a post. I heard my own breathing thud in my eardrums. I thought, he can't be here. But I knew better. I moved deeper. At the far end, near a rusted trough, lay a single cowboy hat, leather-stained, brim torn. I remembered that quick glimpse on my dash cam, that cowboy hat blurred at the edge. I flicked the beam across the floor. There were footprints, the same boots. One step into the floorboards, then another, leading to a far corner. I followed. For an instant, I thought the hat might pop up, some preacher's hat left behind. But it wasn't a preacher's hat, it was Mark Harris's. I lifted it carefully, tugged my glove on. I pressed my palm against the inside band. No sweat, but dust and ash. I held it up in the beam, spin around to scan the rafters. Nothing. A gust of wind rattled the tin that was left of the roof, and I thought I saw movement on the far edge, like someone crossing the beams above me. I radioed. "Lieutenant, I've got Harris's hat at Old Pringle Barn." No sign of Harris. Footprints lead east. I squinted through the dust. Beyond the barn, I saw nothing but desert. Yet my ears caught another sound. Something like panting, 3 feet above me. My hair stood on end. I turned my light upward. Nothing, just rafters and a starless sky peeking through a hole. I exhaled slow. I closed my eyes. Another pant. A steady inhale and exhale, low, deliberate. I swung my light to the front of the barn. I saw, for a split second, a pair of boots balancing on a beam, chest rising and falling in the dark. I gasped, and it vanished. 1 heartbeat space. The beam slapped gently, as though someone shifted weight, then stepped away. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's when the radio crackled again. Static, then a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." I drew in a quick breath, clicked the mic. "Ramirez, I copy. Identify yourself." Nothing but wind. My hair flicked across my forehead. I realized I was leaning forward, legs spread, heart pounding. That whisper sounded like the wind, like someone pressing breath against the mic, except it was too purposeful. I boarded it up. "Lieutenant, I need immediate backup. Possible subject on rafters. I'm alone." The lieutenant barked back, "All units out." ETA 10 minutes. I felt 10 minutes might as well be 10 years. I slid the cowboy hat into an evidence bag. The brim brushed against my glove, and I could have sworn I felt moisture, like sweat, inside the band. I shook it, but dust fell into my glove. That moisture stuck to me. I closed the bag. I tapped the beam toward the rafters. I could see my breath, white puffs against darkness. My senses screamed. I tore back to the cruiser, slammed the door, locked it. When I looked up at the barn, I thought I saw a flash of light farther east, like someone's flashlight flicking in the desert. I revved the engine. I called backup, but in that clutch I almost stayed inside. Turned the lights off and watched the far horizon. Instead, I drove back to FM 170, heading for the Potrero Pass where backup might intercept, all the time thinking about panting in the rafters. By 3:40 a.m., DPS Unit 6 arrived. A pair of troopers' crew, guns drawn. I signaled them to follow my beam back to the barn. We circled it. Up there, where I saw those boots, was empty. No footprints on the rafters. I could have sworn there was sweat on that hat. But up there, only bone and cobweb. They said they'd canvass the area later. I watched them leave, jaw tight. I stayed behind, eyes sweeping the perimeter. I smelled wetness, almost like rain, but the sky was clear. The grass below shook like someone brushed by. I flicked my light. My breath caught as the glare hit an abandoned CB radio resting near broken feed sacks. The display flickered faintly, 0911. I picked it up, dialed a frequency, turned knobs, nothing. But those numbers rang again and again in my mind. I laid the set back in the dust. My feet felt heavy, like I was walking through water. The troopers came back. "Nothing out here." "We're heading back." I nodded. I climbed into my cruiser, stamp imprint in my chest. I could still feel that whisper, "You shouldn't have come," gravitating toward my ear. The hat lay on the floorboard at my feet. I shoved it onto the passenger seat, didn't bother bagging it further. I gripped the wheel tight, knees rattling. I drove back to the station, dawn edges creeping over the sky. I scanned my rearview mirror, saw a blur of brush along the roadside. It could have been a dust devil, could have been nothing. But every mile I drove, I felt that night stretching longer, an elastic chain tugging behind me. When lights of the precinct rose ahead, I exhaled, let the tears I didn't know I'd been holding slide down my cheeks. Another ghost in my pocket, but I felt numb. I typed up my supplemental, Harris's hat recovered, no sign of suspect. Never wrote about the panting, never wrote about you shouldn't have come. Back at the station, I jammed my head against the window, tried to clear the desert out of my thoughts. Lieutenant asked if I was okay. I said yes through clenched teeth. My voice sounded like secondary smoke, bilious and thin. I checked my cruiser for prints. Nothing but dust. I bagged Harris's hat, labeled it property of M. Harris, location Old Pringle Barn. The sergeant gave me up to noon shift. My wife would be off at the hospital round then. I left the station at 6 a.m., drove home in a daze. Dawn lit the sky pale pink. I saw Mia's school bus rolling down our street. She waved through the window. I waved back, but my face must have been drawn. She frowned. I forced a smile and mouthed, "See you tonight." She got off. My wife walked out to retrieve her, gave me a look that said, "You look like hell." I nodded, but she didn't press. By the time I stepped inside, Carmen was already in scrubs. Her hospital shift ran till 3 p.m. "You okay?" she asked, leaning against the door frame. I nodded, kissed her cheek. She peered at me, as if measuring my forearms, looking for bruises. I said, "Long night." She offered me coffee. I couldn't face it. I trudged to our bedroom, collapsed, and slept until her return. When I woke at 4 p.m., sweat plastered my uniform. My dreams had been wild, me running through writhing mesquite, a figure clawing at my vest, yelling 0911 until I woke suffocating. I worked the kinks out of my neck and stumbled into the living room. That cowboy hat sat on the corner table, innocuous as any hat. I almost cussed out loud. I stared at it, then stepped back. I didn't touch it. Mia came bounding in. "Daddy, come watch cartoons." She hopped onto the couch. I sank into an armchair, shook my head. "Just let me sit," I said. She sat beside me, grabbed my hand. "You okay, Dad?" I masked it. "Just tired, baby." She patted my hand and surfed through channels. I watched cartoons, but my eyes were never on them. I was thinking of Harris, out there in the desert, or whatever fate had taken him. I wondered if he was scared, if he knew someone watched him in that barn. I felt like I'd been warned and ignored the warning. I felt like I was being hunted. Night came again. I changed into uniform before dark. My wife kissed me and murmured, "Be safe." I wanted to tell her, "Nobody's safe," but the words felt like knives. Instead, I said, "I will." I kissed Mia good night. She said, "Be careful, Daddy." Her eyes brimmed with concern. I closed the door and leaned against it. I let her worry sink in. Then I marched toward that cruiser, heart pounding, wondering if tonight I'd leave my bones in the desert. At exactly 9 p.m., the radio crackled. "Testing, 0911. A faint latch of noise, then silence. Everything in me froze. I reached for the mic. "Ramirez to dispatch. Can't confirm source." My voice shook through the earpiece. No answer. I glanced at the highways lit by salt and pepper glow of distant towns. Van Horn, Marfa, Alpine, names stenciled along the dust. My lights cut a narrow swath through nothing. As I drove south on US 67, the desert air pressed against the window, hollow and cold. That radio broadcast. Who in God's name was repeating those digits? I shook the thought off. Radioed in to say I was en route to check on the 24-hour chevron near Toya. Might be a prank. Pranking an officer on patrol is a misdemeanor. Still, I tightened seatbelt, felt the bones of my spine shift. I passed through Balmerhia, ghosting the old spring-fed pool long since closed. I thought, don't stop here. Keep moving. By 10:23 p.m., I rolled into the chevron, brand new lights reflecting off slick pavement. A lone attendant huddled behind a plexiglass window. I stepped out, boots clicking on tile. He looked up at me, bleary-eyed. "Evening, sir. Coffee?" I nodded. I scanned the lot. No cars, no sign of disturbance. He poured coffee. I sipped, scalding hot. "Anything odd?" He shook his head. I studied the pumps. A CB radio on the counter, turned to some channel I couldn't make out. Static buzz leaked from the speaker. I radioed dispatch. Chevron clear, but radio on counter, no one around. I nodded to them both, walked out. I noticed a number scratched into the pump's black paint, 0911. Faded but visible. My heart slammed. Someone had been here, or that pump was a marker. I took a photo. The attendant's eyes tracked me. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked. I offered a curt nod and climbed back in the cruiser. I set my destination for Pinto Canyon Road, a gravel stretch that cut through ranch land. Local rumor was that people vanished out there, never to be seen again. 95 miles to Alpine, 100 miles back. My radio cut in again. "Ramirez, 0911, thank you." A voice low, clipped. I slammed the brake pedal, nearly spun out. I hit the mic. "Identify yourself. State who this is." Nothing but the faint hum of my engine idling. I flicked knobs, back to patrol channel, silence. Then a dispatch chatter about sighting a trailer east of Terlingua. That could be false. We never saw a trailer out there, just sat on a rise, cowboy graves. I radioed in to ask for a descriptor. They said no one gave us a call, it was secondary. I turned away, pressed my foot on the gas. By 11:37 p.m., I left Highway 90 at mile marker 169. Pinto Canyon Road stretched before me. A rock-laced ribbon, oil pump jacks lining the shoulder every half mile, half dead from season's end. I killed the headlights and rolled to a stop. I felt my pulse hammer as quiet settled thicker than wool. I scanned the oil rigs with my spotlight. Rocks kicked up, brush rustled. I reached for the mic. "Dispatch, I'm at Pinto Canyon Road." I hear a radio, 0911. The sergeant's reply was flat. "We're trying to trace. Stand by. Stand by." 10 words he probably repeated 50 times since Harris disappeared. I pocketed the mic, stepped out. The air was a vacuum. I cracked my flashlight, lit a beam that trembled. I aimed between 2 rigs. There, I saw a patch of disturbed earth, like something had been dragged. I hunched, rolled the brim of my hat low, and approached slowly. My boots sank into loose rock. I rubbed my palm along broken twigs. No prints, but scuff marks on loose soil. I shined the light lower, pieces of rope, phrase floating in dust. I called out, voice echoing, "Anyone there?" My breath puffed front of me, forming small clouds. No answer. Next to me, a CB antenna drooped against a fence post. Thin copper lines looped around rusted iron. I traced it with a gloved hand. No radio, just antenna and wire. I tugged one line. It sparked in my fingers. I jerked back, looked up, a faint glow of desert horizon. Nothing but that hush. I turned the antenna plug in my pocket. No sound. My ears caught a subtle click, like a radio ignition switch turning on. I flicked my head toward the rigs. Shadow passed between 2 of them, moving slowly. I swung the beam. Nothing. I flicked again. Shadow gone. At that, my radio crackled, louder. Ramirez. Ram. Then static swallowed the rest. I typed a note on my pad. Signs of struggle at Pinto Canyon Road. Frayed rope, disturbed soil, CB antenna active, possible suspect flux. I closed the pad. Heard a rattling behind me. I pivoted, shined my light. Mechanical parts swinging on a pump jack. One of them oscillated like a pendulum. But at the base, a coil of rope lay atop exposed gear. Sparks flickered around it, like someone had tried to jury-rig something there. I snapped a photo. My knuckles bled from gripping the flashlight. A bead of sweat froze on my upper lip. A horn of wind slapped me. I smelled grease, saw the pickaxe-shaped silhouette of a man probably 10 yards back, half inside a bathtub of rod oil, still enough to catch my beam. I raised my voice, official tone. Texas DPS, show yourself. No movement. He wore cadet boots, wrinkled fatigues, uniform scraps, like someone had slept in a patrol car, then scavenged parts. His head swung slowly, like a doll on a string. I took a step back, heart speeding. My hand drifted to my pistol. But how could I shoot into darkness where I could barely breathe? He lifted one hand, pointed at me, then dropped it. A gasp, like wind on old boards, blew through the rig. I felt cold trickle down my spine. I stepped forward, shining the light full blast. The beam split the darkness to show his face. Hollowed eye sockets, no whites, no iris, just black pits of nothing. I jerked back, stumbled on a jagged rock. The sound of short, raspy breath rattled the air behind me. I spun the beam around. The figure was gone. Couldn't find him. The rope coil lay heavy on the gears, but no prints. My mind screamed. I grabbed my pistol's holster, hand shaking. My radio crackled. All units, be advised. Unknown subject reported at Pinto Canyon Road. Possible suicidal driver. Then dispatch kicked in. Multiple calls. Coordinate with Presidio PD. I dropped my pistol, grabbed the mic. Ramirez. Subject had no face. He pointed, then vanished. Coordinates. Pinto Canyon. Road mile, post 2.7. No answer. My radio died. I pounded on the cruiser door, heart beating so hard I thought it might soar out. I slid in, locked it, and powered the engine. My arms trembled so badly I nearly drove off in reverse. I pulled onto the road, lights on high. With every bump, my skull rattled. I tore back toward US 67, lost in a haze of dust and dread. 2 minutes later, I backtracked, looking for that silhouette. No sign on the road, no scraps of cloth, no boot treads. Nothing but pink horizon creeping behind me. I cursed under breath. Son of a bitch. I refused to believe it. Refused to think a ghost could point and vanish. Yet my arms felt pinned by the memory of hollow eye sockets. My head hummed. I clicked my radio, static. I tried the phone, 1 bar, then dropping. I dialed the sergeant. Need gas backup. ASAP hissed through heavy breath. Hang tight, was all he said. By 1 a.m., the DPS cargo van arrived. Veteran Trooper Lopez and Rookie Martinez climbed out, flashlights on. You okay? Lopez asked, scanning the rigs. I forced my voice steady. I saw something. A man with no face. Lopez rubbed his chin. We checked perimeter. Nothing. You sure you saw a man? That question cut me deep. I nodded. He was real. Martinez lit a cigarette. Truth is stranger than fiction, he said. Where'd he vanish to? I shrugged. Desert just eats people sometimes. We combed the ground, used magnifiers, evidence markers. Martinez marked the rope coil. Lopez checked the CB antenna base. It was wired into the rig's panel. Someone had tapped current from the wellhead. I shook my head. That's a far cry from a call sign. Lopez growled. Kid probably wired that up. Get our eyes on what's live, maybe we catch our guy. They left around 3:15 a.m. I stayed in my cruiser, headlights on, scanning like a sentinel. The rest of the night went sideways. No more calls on 0911. No response from dispatch. When sunrise creased the edge, I called in. Corporal Ramirez, Pinto Canyon Road, checked. No suspect found. Evidence bagged. I watched the sky lighten, orange bleeding into pink. The rigs cast long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, mocking. My palms ached from gripping the steering wheel. I handed my report to Lopez later, marked Rune Unknown Subject on Rig Prompt, Possible SVC, Subject Vehicle Collision. No one asked about the faceless man. No one wanted to believe. Back at the station, I peeled off my uniform, soaked in sweat and bitterness. The sergeant asked if I wanted a day off. I shook my head. I'll be at my desk. I brewed strong coffee in the break room, then stared at my reflection in the window. My face looked gaunt. I thought of Harris's hat tucked away in evidence. I wondered if Harris had seen that same silhouette. I wondered if that silhouette was watching me right now. I spent the rest of the day filing, tracing CB logs, reviewing dash cam footage. Nothing. My reports cleared me for the night shift again. I'd grown numb to the idea that nothing ever makes sense. When I got home at 4 p.m., my wife asked how it went. I told her, just another shift. Mia ran around the house asking about a cookie. I hugged my wife, told her I was exhausted. She said, "Come to bed early." I watched her walk away, her silhouette soft in the afternoon sun. I felt like a stranger under that roof. I tried to sleep before that shift, but my phone rang at 8 p.m. Caller ID, unknown. I answered on impulse, static. Then a raspy breathing, a slow inhale and exhale. I slammed the phone down. Blood drummed in my ears. I sat up, reached for the phone, then thought better of it. I tossed it across the room. That breathing came from everywhere. In my chest, on the radio, in the barn, in the trailer. It was a constant. At 9 p.m., I returned to the cruiser. The dash lay cluttered with maps, coffee stains, sticky notes. On one, in my handwriting, watch for flashing lights. Another, 0911, check CB logs. I ran my finger over that last note. I turned the key. The engine rumble felt heavier tonight, as though it carried a ghost. I reversed out of my driveway and headed back to 385. The landscape outside was pitch black, except for slivers of moonlight. I reminded myself to breathe. Inhale, inhale, steady. My next call, report of blinking headlights near RM 170. I could hear the radio counting down frequencies. Harris channel, 0911, 0911. I stayed on September 11th. The static wove around me, louder this time. Then came that whisper, "You left him." I floored the gas pedal. My cruiser lurched forward. I slammed on the brakes. The radio popped. "He's watching." I jumped, body jolting. Almost lost the wheel. My pulse skyrocketed. I tapped the mic. "Who's this? Identify." Only wind answered. I sat alone on RM 170, engine idling. I hovered between shock and anger. I typed my next note, blipping on 0911, whispered threats, rotating backlights, no vehicle found. I shoved the pad into my vest. I sat, fingers tightening on the wheel, head pounding. The whisper curled around me. "He's watching." I grabbed the mic. "This is Corporal Ramirez. Identify yourself or surrender." But a burst of static cut me. I hung my head, heart thundering. I revved the engine and drove on, tracking the whisper. I knew I shouldn't, but at 10:45 p.m. I turned onto the side road that led to the emerald-lit pier at Big Bend Ranch State Park. That road clings to the cliffside, hairpin turns dropping straight into the Rio Grande Gorge. I eased my rig along gravel. Somewhere past the turnoff, I felt a presence, like someone just stood on the hood and stared down into the canyon. My lights shone through dust. Nothing. At 11:02 p.m., I crested the last hill before the river. The stars overhead were thick as plums. I flicked my flashlight between two large mesquite trees. I saw boot prints leading down to a deadfall oak by the edge. I got out, strapped my holster, and crept down. Wind whipped the river's surface, ripples glittering silver. I knelt next to the prints. The same boot tread, as if those boots had been everywhere that night, large, wide, cowboy style. I locked eyes on the river's black underbelly. Then I heard it. A scraping from the woods behind me, just beyond the light's throw. My adrenaline spiked, hand to holster. I snapped my flashlight to my face, spun. The trunks of those trees were cut with slashes in zigzag patterns, almost like someone used a machete or a sharp blade to carve lines. And between those lines, more graffiti. 0911, don't trust the shadows. My heart sank. I scribbled it onto my pad. I felt the sense of being watched, heavier than before. I turned slowly. There, emerging from the brush, a figure so distant I could only see a silhouette. Tall, wide shoulders, no face I could make out. Just that broad outline and a hat. That hat was tilted low. I called out, "Come here!" I swallowed, no reply. I shone the light, forced a yelp, nothing but static. The figure raised one hand, lifted it high, as though pointing at me from the tree line. Then it stepped out of the brush and vanished. I was on my knees, eyes tearing. The only thing left was the old hat, lying in the dirt behind me. I finally recognized the shape. It was Harris's hat. Old, worn, dusty. I sank forward, chest heaving. I grabbed it, ran, reached my cruiser and started the engine. I pressed my foot to the pedal. My radio locked back onto 0911. Static hissed, then that whisper, "You took his hat." I ground my teeth, slanted a glance behind, empty desert. I drove off, leaving that canyon behind. I replay that night's run again and again, every gasp, every shadow, every word unspoken. After the hacienda at Big Bend, I didn't stop for hours. I drove straight back to the station, headlights locked on low, knuckles white. The radio hissed relentlessly, 0911, Ramirez, Ramirez. Each repeat felt like a drumbeat in my skull. When I finally crashed into the precinct parking lot at 2:17 a.m., I was trembling so badly I could barely kill the engine. Lieutenant Villarreal was halfway down the hall when I punched the mic. "Lieutenant, I tried to gather thoughts into words, but they tumbled out all at once. I found Harris's hat at Pinto Canyon Road, then in the barn, then now in Big Bend. He's watching. The same boots followed me. The radio, 0911, keeps hitting." I paused, chest heaving. He held up a hand. "Show me." I fumbled for the hat, dust clinging to it, brim folded. He took it gently, ran his fingertip over the name tag. M. Harris. He turned the hat slowly under the flickering fluorescent light. No sweat, no blood, just a thin crust of desert dirt. "What did you say you heard?" he asked, his voice low. I told him. He listened without blinking, then tucked the hat into an evidence bag. "We'll secure this." He nodded to me, steely eyes. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we talk." But rest was a lie that left me hungry. I tried sleeping, but all I heard were phantoms in the walls, static in the cracks, boots on the rafters. At 9 a.m., I found myself in the sheriff's office, the one we used when bigger crimes came in. I asked for records on CB transmissions. records for 0911 calls in the last 20 years. They handed me a dusty binder, one page for an amateur radio license, another for a defunct trucking company. Nothing conclusive. I scanned the sheet, my own call sign scribbled in on past runs. No anomalies. A blank. I flipped pages, dispatch logs from February, lines marked private channel interference, untraceable, just like mine. All scattered. Patterns but no answers. Still, it felt like rings in a tree trunk. Something terrible spread outward. I left in a haze. My partner, Deputy Garcia, flagged me. "You look like a ghost," he said. I just shook my head. "I'm fine." But his eyes pinned me. "Another late-night trip?" He tapped my shoulder. "You need to let someone ride with you." I laughed, half bitter. "I'm fine. I've been doing this." He sighed. "You're not fine. You need a break." But I didn't. I needed truth. By 11 p.m. that night, I was back on US 67, heading west. I kept the CB tuned to 0911, waiting for the hiss. I drove past the old Morgan filling station, lights off since 2003, past wind turbines standing like thrown-away trust. My speed was a crawl, 45 miles per hour. At 12:15 a.m., my radio came alive. A soft crackle, then 3 digits, 0911, watch 94, then ripping static. I slammed the brakes, pulled over. I flipped through frequencies, found one more silent channel. CB, call 94. I switched to that. Nothing, just static. I stared at the dash, heart pounding, then my phone buzzed. Caller ID, 0911. I didn't answer. The phone went quiet. I chucked it across the passenger seat. It skidded between my boots. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was facing 94 on the radio face, static burning in my eardrums. I turned the knob. Silence. That phone buzzed again. Caller ID, unknown. I didn't answer. Didn't want to hear that panting. Didn't want to hear that whisper. I drove on, past Hillcrest Mountain, a rocky rise famous for phantom hitchhikers, names like the Cowboy of Hillcrest etched on local boards. I thought, I need closure, but I knew I wouldn't get it anytime soon. At 1:43 a.m., I veered off onto the dirt path leading to the old Carver Ranch, 1,000 acres abandoned since the 80s when oil prices collapsed. The map showed A-frame house, a cabin perched on a rise overlooking the desert, used by oilmen as a lookout. I passed a sign, authorized personnel only. I ignored it. That A-frame was only accessible by that 1 mile of loose rock. I parked at the gate, unhooked my flashlight again, and started up. The height of the A-frame was a narrow, steep climb. Old planks entangled with tumbleweeds, nails protruding from rafters, windows boarded. I found the door locked. A yellow-green sign nailed to it read, "Trespassers will be..." The rest was faded. I shined inside. No furniture. Dirt floor littered with water bottles, spent ammo shells, and a ceramic coffee mug emblazoned with SFGLO oil and gas. I knelt, flicked my light around the interior. Holes in the wall where boards used to be. I could see stars slinking across the sky. A low hum came from behind the cabin, like distant rotors. I flicked on my mic. "Ramirez, I'm at Carver Ranch A-frame. Found nothing. Nothing but that hum." I didn't fill in the rest. I angled my flashlight outside, threw light on the desert floor. There, a pair of footprints, cowboy boots again. I crouched, pressed my glove to the prints, cold ash in the dirt. I followed them to the corner of the cabin. They led to a hole in the wood, like something had been dragged out. Any minute, I'd think I'd see a body, a dead cow, or that phantom figure. Instead, I heard a quiet rasp, breathing, faint, right on the other side of the wall. I clicked my flashlight off. I stepped closer, pressed my ear to the wood. That breathing slowed, measured. Then it stopped. I shiver, jumped back. The radio in my cruiser crackled from inside my coat, tuned to CB94. Time's up. Just 2 words, cold chisel on bone. I swallowed. I pounded on the door 3 times. This is DPS, come out. Silence. Then the door creaked, slowly. I jumped to the side. A hand slid through the crack, thin, gloved, glistening. The glove was stained dark. I yanked the door open. Bright moonlight revealed nothing. Only dust motes drifting in the beam. I stepped inside, heart boomed. I shone the beam onto the back wall. There, scrawled in charcoal, 0911 took him. My stomach turned. I thought of Harris's hat, of the shouting in that canyon. I looked around. No furniture, only old floorboards that moaned under my weight. I grabbed a chunk of charcoal from the wall, twisted piece as if ripped. I fled down the dirt path, nearly slipping in loose rock. I hit my cruiser at 2:37 a.m., slammed the door, and sped off. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. That night, I returned to find Patton's Fork Road, a whisper from an informant about a hood promising watchers in the shadows. But all I saw were tumbleweeds and coyotes. I clicked my mic. Ramirez to dispatch. Patton's Fork, nothing. The radio crackled. Ramirez, 010. It died into static. I turned the channel, 0911. Silence. Morning came with alarm bells ringing in my head. I reported to HQ, filed the A-frame cabin entry, and sent photos of the graffiti. Lieutenant took one look inside. Ramirez, you okay? I shook my head. Over coffee, he said, you've got to step back. We can't chase rumors. Focus on cold calls, impounded vehicles, theft reports. I nodded, but I knew I couldn't. The desert was breathing secrets at me, twisting reality. All I could do was keep searching. That afternoon, I went to Harris's family home in Hudspeth County. Met his wife, Sandra. She touched the cowboy hat I handed her, worn brim, dust still caked around the band. She cried, clutched it like it was him. She said, they'll find Mark. He's a cop. He's resourceful. I wanted to lie, tell her I believed it. I didn't. We sat at her kitchen table, cereal bowls stuck with sugar, coffee cold. She offered me toast. I declined. I sat across from her, felt guilt like concrete in my chest. I left and drove back to the station. Night shift in 3 hours. I returned home. My wife had left for a late dinner with a friend. I checked on Mia. She'd fallen asleep with her head half hung off the couch. I covered her, kissed her forehead. I told myself to sleep. But at 8 p.m., my phone flickered. Text message, no number. He's closer. My chest seized. I felt the walls close in as I drove north on US 385. Radio on 0911 hissed promise and peril as I passed the blinking lights of Marathon and rolled past Valentine. The desert felt less empty and more like muscle watching every move. My knuckles white, I stared absolute into that road. Nothing but dust and the occasional mesquite clump. I'd been awake for 48 hours. Coffee no longer warmed me. Sleep no longer came. All I had was that phantom voice whittling at my mind. You left him again. My next assignment, a routine welfare check on a Border Patrol agent station out near Saragossa. Should have been a cakewalk. Drive 40 minutes, knock on a door, confirm radio range. But I cringed at every bump in the pavement, terrified what I might find instead. Around 10 p.m., I turned off the highway onto a gravel road that led to the station. a small cinder block building with a single fluorescent bulb over the entrance. I parked, field of view slashed by night. I pulled my flashlight from under the seat, clicked it on, and stepped out. My breath curled multiple loops in the air. I dragged my finger across the bullet hole-riddled sign reading USCIS Outpost 72. I raised my flashlight, no one visible. I knocked 3 times, no reply. I leaned in to peek at the window, blinds drawn. I flipped my light to peek under the door. Darkness. It felt heavy, like my blood was weighted. I called dispatch. Ramirez, welfare check on USCIS Outpost 72. No one answers. Static. I felt a chill. My flashlight ray hit a smear on the door. Blood? I pressed closer, and my beam shook. I dropped to my knees, felt the smear. Dried, caked. I traced it. Fresh enough to suggest something had dragged across. My pulse hammered in my throat. I radioed. Sergeant, Outpost 72, blood on door. Possible disturbance, backup needed. In response, copy that. IDA 10. I stood, scanned perimeter. Wide open terrain, no other structures in sight. A metal fence caged the yard. A rusted Iranian pickup sat inside, mud-spattered windows. I moved to it, no footprints. The glass was smeared with handprints. Impossible if no winds had hit. I ran my palm across a smear. Red-brown dust caked. I shook my head. An unnatural quiet settled. I touched my gun holster, feeling my forearms flex involuntarily. My head buzzed. The night was alive, yet empty. I took 2 breaths, prayed nothing orbits this place. I examined the pickup's cab. No keys, doors unlocked. Inside, a faded ranger badge from 1999 sat on the seat. It read, E. Calderon, with no agency. I snapped photo. I felt a nudge on my left shoulder. I spun. Nothing. I shone my light, a narrow window facing a small office inside the outpost. I saw movement, a shadow, drifting. I keyed my mic. Ramirez, I see movement inside. Looks human. No response. The lieutenant tweaked my call sign. Corporal, hold off. You're one man. I nodded to no one. I pulled out my radio mic. I'm going in. I pushed through the door, my boots creaking. I scanned left. Empty chairs, computer screens dark, 2 desks. On one desk, a radio sat, tuned to 0911. Static humming. I flicked the switch. The display flickered 0911. My heart slashed. I cherished each breath. The shadow moved again, taller, bulkier, slid behind a column. I flinched. My flashlight bounced, searching. I called, Texas DPS, come out. That was weak. No response. I took another step. My boots tapped on tile cracked by age. Suddenly, the radio upstairs blasted. 0911, 0911 is God's eye. That voice was twisted, low, deliberate. I hammered on the mic. Identify. Surrender. No answer. I climbed a small ladder leading to a trapdoor. The stairs above were narrow. Each step moaned. I reached the top, found a narrow loft with dust, old mattresses, and a single window flush with the roof. I saw footprints and dust leading back to the trapdoor entrance. I knelt, rubbed the dust. Prints small? Women's size? They tapered into narrow ankles. I thought, who else is out here? The radio clacked. You took his hat. You took his child. You'll pay. My heart scrambled. I scrambled backwards, nearly falling. I sprinted down the ladder, out the door, slammed it shut. I kicked the lock bar spin. Lieutenant. Multiple subjects. One female boot print, radio threat. I'm pinned. The lieutenant came on, voice angry. Corporal, pull back. We're sending a team. I relayed my position. I waited, back pressed against a cinder block, gun drawn. Within 5 minutes, a half-dozen units arrived. Medina County deputies, Border Patrol SUVs, DPS troopers. Lights flashed across the compound. Officer Lopez joined me. "What the hell is going on?" I shook head. "I don't know." We cleared the building, flashlights slicing shadows. Upstairs, dust was disturbed, print trails leading outside, no body. A drop of blood on floor, fresh. We followed prints outside, leading toward a clump of yucca. I shined light, a woman's sandal, broken buckle, nothing else. I thought of that boot track in the checkbox, slender, different size, could be female. I radioed for a tracker dog. Minutes passed. We heard UGV drones out, silent in the sky. I felt disoriented, stuck in a nightmare. The trackers came back, no signs. They said footprints petered out. Another 0911 scratched on the corner of the fence. God's eye sees all. I stood, jaw locked, feeling hollow. They booked me on suspicious entry but gave no details to me. By 4 a.m., patrols had combed the area, no one found. The lieutenant escorted me away. On the drive back, the sun threatened skyline, pink and blistering. I stared ahead. The radio in my cruiser sat dead. I thought of that radio upstairs, broadcasting from nowhere. I wondered if that woman was alive or already turned to dust in the desert. I wondered how someone whispered through air and walls, through radios and phones, yet moved without trace. That afternoon, I visited the county morgue. They'd processed a female body found in a shallow grave near Paisley Junction. Thin, probable early 30s, boots removed, hands bound, no ID. I stood in the viewing room, saw her face, no markings, lashes long, lips cracked. Hair black, tied in a loose braid. Could be anyone. I thought of the ranch's boot prints. Smaller, hinted at her. I thought, she's the one who called me, the voice I heard. I cringed. How many times must I hear death before my ears bleed? I left the morgue with a tag. Unidentified female, possible connection to Outpost 72. I walked halls, past morticians' tables. Each room smelled of antiseptic and rot. I forced a steady breath. By the time I stepped outside, noon heat pressed against my chest like iron. Smoke from a roadside fire drifted, gritty in the air. I bit my lip. I grabbed the ID tag, handwritten by medical examiner. Fem-0312. That had to be her. I drove home, body weightless with dread. On the way, I thought about Harris's hat. 3 locations in 2 nights. I thought about that nebulous label. Fem-0312. This woman caught in a triangle of desert and blood. And 0911. A number more ominous than any. At home around 2 p.m., I found a gift bag on my front stoop. Stay safe. Inside, 2 small candles and a note scrawled, "Light them." No signature. I flicked them off and flung the bag into my grass. I didn't feel safe. I wanted to rip my uniform off and burn it. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. By 8 p.m., my wife had gone to bed early, worried about my eyes. "Please come home when you can," she said. I promised, though I didn't know if I'd make it. I drove north again at 9 p.m., this time to Lobo Canyon Road, where locals said hitchhikers vanished near an old stone monument. I passed empty road, canned wind moaning through guardrails. By 10:05 p.m., I was there. Dusty monument, thin, spindly slab, no name, just a date. March 15th, 1977. No spark, no plaque, it seemed forgotten. I circled it. My radio clicked. 0911. No one left. I felt tears sting. Then another call. Ramirez. Ramirez, bring his hat to the canyon. One voice, male, rasping, desperate. I steadied myself. I have his hat. Where? The static swallowed the rest. I whispered back, "Tell me." Radio fell silent. My pulse thundered. I scanned horizon with flashlight, nothing. Then, behind me, the echo of a hat against rock. I whirled, no hat, no body. I banged a stone slab with my flashlight, clang, ears ringing. I dropped to my knees, grabbed a rock, smashed the slab. It cracked. Inside, a small hollow, Harris's hat, misshapen and brittle. My heart sank. I yanked it out, turned, and felt an unseen presence behind me, a shape coalescing into nothing. I raised my voice, "Who are you?" Only wind answered. I drove away, clutching the hat, tears streaking my cheeks. I realized on that drive back, I had two choices, quit or push deeper. Quitting meant leaving my badge on a desk somewhere, telling my wife and kids not to wait up. But I wasn't sure that would help. The codes didn't leave me. Instead, I chose to push deeper. I arrived again at the station at 2 a.m. My uniform was stiff with desiccated sweat. Inside, the fluorescent lights emboldened every dust mote. I found the lieutenant pacing outside the locker room. He gave me a look like he'd been expecting me. I clutched Harris's hat like a lifeline, brim worn bare, dirt caked beneath the band. He nodded. "Go home, Ramirez." I shook my head. "Not yet. I need one last piece." He studied me, then sighed. "If you go, gear up. You're heading to Larson Tunnel." "Why there?" I asked. He looked away. "Last call. Marksmen found bodies, 3 men, last year. All professional backgrounds, all wearing DPS uniforms brought by unknown hands." My heart stuttered. That station in Larson Tunnel was 6 hours west, on the border near Candlewood Pass. It was a sweltering zone in the day, barren at night. I retrieved a water bottle, loaded my cruiser, and left before he could object. I drove in silence. CB dialed into 0911, but quiet now. Wind howled past the cruiser. I turned onto Highway 62 westbound. Miles peeled off under dim halogen orange halos. I passed Mule Shoe, Olympia Canyon, Fort Davis, each name a reminder of how little control we have on these roads. I refilled gas at Fort Stockton, stared at a scanner in the convenience store. Looked like someone had keyed 0911-investigator over and over. Clerk shrugged when I asked. By midnight, I exited onto dirt roads leading to Larson Tunnel. No streetlights. My headlights dissected the earth, a rough 2-track that zigzagged through jagged hills. My hand hovered over the mic, nothing. The radio's regular channel lit up with unmarked calls, but when I tuned to those, only more static. At 2:47 a.m., I finally saw it. Larson Tunnel sign, hand-painted wood, letters italicizing DPS Confidential Outpost. I parked at the station's lone bay, an old artillery bunker carved into the hill. It had served as a highway station for decades, now dormant. My cruiser lights turned the asphalt metallic blue. I stepped out, flashlight ready. The door was ajar, hanging on one hinge. I kicked it, stood inside. The stale air smelled like mold and mothballs. My light revealed a desk, maps tacked to the wall, coffee rings on papers yellowed by age. I saw 3 outlines on a whiteboard. The names Simpson, Ellis, Duvall. They died there in April 2005, marked UOF, under official force, with question marks. I typed 3 DPS uniforms found here, unknown cause. I snapped a photo. Walking deeper, I found lockers. 2 uniforms still hung in those steel casings, pristine except for fuzzy orange dust. I lifted one, felt the weight of fabric, smelled that creosote tang, seasoned with mildew. I slid my hands through the armholes. In each breast pocket, pockets neatly sewn in, no body heat, no prints. But inside the right pocket of the first uniform was a small sealed envelope. No writing, just that haphazard wax seal. I pried it open. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white. A shot of a little girl sleeping on a couch, tiny freckles on her cheeks. Written on the back in scratchy cursive, Mia, 2006. My heart seized. My daughter. My living, breathing daughter. I dropped the photo like it was burning. A wave of nausea slammed me. I swallowed hard, turned the envelope around, nothing else. That photograph should have never been here. I cradled it, chest tight. I shoved it in my pocket. My radio crackled with a voice I knew too well, raspy, urgent. "You found her. Come to the tunnel. Bring his hat." I looked down at Harris's hat in my hand. It felt heavy, cursed. I clenched my teeth. "Where are you?" I rasped. The line hissed with heat. "Look behind you." I turned slowly. Behind me, the corridor extended into absolute darkness, like an open grave. At the end of the corridor, I saw something. I couldn't see it clearly, but a thin shape hovered at the entrance of the tunnel. The air there glistened with dust motes. I raised the flashlight. Light trembled off that shape. A girl. My pulse convulsed. She sat on a makeshift bench angled toward me, knees pulled to chest. She wore a nightgown, hair mussed. Her eyes were locked ahead, lifeless. I shone my light full. Still, she didn't move. The uniform she wore was small, child-sized DPS jacket, zipped halfway. Her bare feet dangled inches from the concrete floor. I swallowed thick. "Mia?" I whispered, hands shaking. Her head jerked toward me, eyes black beyond pupil, deep wells. She lifted one hand, pointed to the underground. I blinked. The uniform and her eyes changed in the same breath. From a uniform to a shredded tunic, eyes red and raw. In that instant, I recognized movement in the tunnel behind her. People clawing from the walls. Bodies pushed out. 3 men, Simpson, Ellis, Duval, rotted and twisted, as though they'd been buried alive. They stared with hollow eyes at me. The girl's form blurred. She sprang to her feet, uniform torn like curtains in the wind. A yawning cavern behind her, deeper than the earth, yawns invitingly. My mind screamed, "Mia's not dead." But I knew she was. Her form slid backward into the opening, the 3 bodies parting like a dark wave. I blinked. They vanished. The tunnel swallowed their shape. Dust swirled at my boots, stinging my eyes. The corridor behind me groaned under weight. The walls bled moisture as if weeping. I looked down. The photograph in my hand now dripped wet, edges curling. Image fading until her face melted into pale smears. I dropped it. It fizzed into dust as the hat in my other hand felt torn, unraveling brim. I staggered back. The floor cracked beneath my boots like the earth was fracturing. A low rumble shook my ribs. I slammed the rifle I carried into the tunnel entrance, praying, demanding, hoping, "Mia!" No answer. Instead, the walls cracked more violently, and a cold wind rushed out, rasping through the hollow. It carried voices, Harris's voice begging. The voices of 3 silent men weeping. The girl's laughter, warped and echoing. "Daddy's here, but he can't save us." I fell to my knees, breathing ragged, my mouth filled with dust and bile. I stumbled, reached out for the wall, cold stone. My radio crackled one last time, louder than before. All shadows end. Then silence swallowed me. I curled into a ball, heartbeat tattooing harshly. I shut my eyes. I imagined waking up in bed, wife beside me, Mia in her blankets. But I knew there was no waking. The reality pressed like a slab over me. In that tunnel, time did not flow. In that tunnel, they waited. 3 faceless men, a dead girl, that ghostly voice. I realized I'd become the next uniform. Another body to feed the desert's hunger. I sat there, pinned by grief and dread until dawn broke. A pale glow seeped through the tunnel entrance, revealing nothing but dust. I crawled to the entrance and saw sunrise cresting the hills. I felt empty, violated, like every breath I'd ever taken belonged to someone else. I stood, uniform in tatters, hat in hand, hat dissolving into dust. I looked back only once. The tunnel shuttered, then sealed behind a pile of rubble that wasn't there before. I staggered back to my cruiser, boot prints trailing behind me, my own footprints in a circle. I placed my palm against the battered hood, exhausted beyond thought. My radio was silent. I radioed into Null. Ramirez here. No one answered. I turned ignition. It refused to start, sputtered, and died. I forced the door open and stepped out, heart pounding, gasping, skin crawling. In the pale light, I saw something clinging to the Charger's front bumper. A small uniform patch embroidered Ramirez. I stared. My throat burned. I tried to pull it free. My hand shook. The moment I touched it, the patch dissolved into the dirt like a drop in the desert sand. I staggered back, thought I might collapse. I closed my eyes, took a trembling breath. My mind was a shattered mirror. I thought of my wife, of Mia, and realized Mia was waiting for a bedtime story she'd never get, a promise I'd never keep. At 6 a.m., Lieutenant Villarreal found me crumpled by the cruiser. He reached out, helped me stand. I handed him nothing. No hat, no photo, no uniform patch, just dust on my palms. He said, "Ramirez, tell me what happened." My voice was lost. I shook my head, tears streaming. "It's over," I managed. "They found everything." He looked at me like a man staring at wreckage. Then he gave me the hardest look I'd ever known. An officer's understanding. "Come home." I let him lead me away. The sun rose high behind us, blinding. I felt like I was drowning in light. Now I stand here, collapsed in a station hallway, uniform gone, hat gone, daughter gone, 3 names echoing in blood. I still hear that voice from the radio, persistent. All shadows end. Did it mean death or end of fear? Does clarity wait in the black? I don't know. All I know is when the sun sets again, I'll be alone with the desert that swallowed my family. I realized the final truth, etched in bone. Sometimes the things you look for to save you are the very shadows that will consume you. It all begins one Friday, late October 2012, with a run down State Highway 90 just outside Van Horn, Texas. I'd been a deputy with the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office for 8 years, but nothing prepares you for the kind of quiet dread you feel when those graveyard hours stretch on and on. I punched in at exactly 11:03 p.m. that night. The station's fluorescent lights already buzzing overhead, as if they'd been switched on days ago. It was just after a cold front blew through, air so crisp it bit at my exposed neck through my uniform shirt. I grabbed my standard issue jacket from the rack, slipped it on, then paused to stare at my reflection in the tinted window. I'd spent years patrolling in this same scatter of West Texas outposts, Marathon, Toya, and then out to where the pavement stops and nothing but scrub brush and jackrabbits remain. I'd shifted my cruiser's seat back a bit, tightened my boots, and then eased out of the parking lot, headlights carving a corridor through pitch-black highway. By the time I reached that old Marathon truck stop, it was exactly 1:07 a.m. The place has one of those half-working neon signs, MARATN, where the H and H flicker in and out, as if someone can't quite decide whether or not to keep the H's lit. I brought my cruiser to a slow roll. The lot looked empty, but I kept my eyes peeled. This truck stop had a reputation for being a rest spot for weary drivers. Trucks lined up next to the diesel pumps. a neon open sign hanging crooked in the window, flickering like a warning. The hum of the fluorescent lights inside was low but consistent, and through the grimy windows I could glimpse a half-lit counter and a lone figure behind it. Maybe the clerk, maybe just some vagrant who hopped behind the counter to stay out of the wind. I killed my dash cam and stepped out, my boots clacking on the cracked asphalt. A stray dog, mangy, ribs showing, slid out from under a rig and gave one long howl. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam swinging low across the diesel tanks. The night's silence slammed into me. No wind aside from a breeze rattling an overhead awning. No hum from any passing rig. I made my way inside and asked if anyone needed help. The clerk, a guy with dark circles under his eyes, shook his head. He said nothing had happened in hours. I nodded and turned to leave, just as my flashlight caught something on the corner of the counter. A flicker of movement. I bent forward, and the dash cam, my own dash cam, was sitting there, its red recording light on, blinking slow as if waiting. I hadn't taken it out of the cradle. I could feel my pulse spike. I told the clerk I'd figure it out later and stepped back out, easing the beam across the cracked pavement to my cruiser. I eased in the driver's door, heart pounding. The dash comm in the window now displayed our cruiser idling under that neon glow. But I was the only one inside. Exactly the way I'd left it. Only now I had no explanation for why it was running. I shrugged it off as an equipment glitch. My partner used to joke that this old rig's electronics were cursed. But there was a weight in my gut I couldn't shake. I clicked off the cam and sat in the driver's seat with my flashlight pointed at the dash. Sure enough, the cam's indicator was dark. I flicked it back on. Nothing. Black screen, no timestamp, no motion. I sighed and told dispatch I was clear to continue west on 90. In my head, I named myself 1093. End of watch. Cruising down the 2-lane where the only brush was tumbleweed and mesquite, I felt small under the dome of stars. By 1:53 a.m., I was just past Toya, where the pavement narrows and the shoulder disappears into an endless skip of gravel. That stretch is called the dead zone among deputies. No cell service for miles, no streetlights, and that one closed sign taped crooked on the door of the Longhorn Junction convenience store, blinking beneath a single bulb that flickered as if it was ready to burn out. I had about half a cup of coffee left in my insulated mug and decided to stretch my legs. I parked under the bulb, turned off the engine, and cupped my mug with both hands, breathing in the bitter steam that stung my nostrils. There was something about 1 a.m. out here. Everything feels pregnant with unseen movement. The wind had nearly died, and when I spun slowly on my heel, I half expected to see something flicker in the scraggly shadows beyond the pumps. But there was only that stray dog again, nose buried in a paper bag near a dumpster. He raised his head, gave me a steady stare, then flicked off into the dark. I stepped back into my cruiser, clicked the dash cam back on, and fired the engine. As I eased forward, my laptop on the passenger seat pinged. I'd left it running to upload reports from the previous shift. I glanced over, upload complete. A folder blinked open on the screen. CCSO logs 102812.pdf. I tapped the screen for my gloves before I realized the file's timestamp read 10:02:512, October 25th. Not 27th, not 26th, 5 days earlier. I furrowed my brow and clicked to open it. Blank pages. My reports from my shift on the 25th. 2 incident calls, 1 suspicious package, 1 missing person check. None of them were there. I rebooted the laptop and tried again. Blank. No files. Those reports had been uploaded last week. I could swear on the lives of my kids they were there. Now, nothing. Dispatch would chalk it up to server maintenance, but I knew exactly when that file had vanished. 1 minute after I parked under that bulb. I glanced at the clock, 1:57 a.m., and put the laptop to sleep. I didn't mention it on the radio. I didn't want to give my sergeant the impression I was losing it. I slid out of the lot and turned south on 285 toward Amistad Lake. That road is a slow stretch of asphalt where ranch fences line both sides, barbed wire glinting in the low beam. It's the kind of place where sound drifts, the distant bark of a coyote, the faint hum of an 18-wheeler engine operating unseen miles away. I switched the radio to monitor all talk groups, waiting for something, anything, to crack the static. All I got was 0004, copy, as if someone tried to key into an empty channel. At 2:31 a.m., I received a call through dispatch. A report of a broken-down Toyota on Farm Road 1788, near an old oil well the locals call the Dead Man Pump. The caller said the driver might have overheated and was stuck. The tone in the dispatcher's voice was clipped, like she was reading from a script. Deputy Merritt, 1041 on Farm 1788. Possible equipment failure. I punched in on the radio. 10-4, checking it. Farm 1788 is a narrow ribbon of asphalt leading into desert floor. No houses for 3 miles. I switched on the overhead lights, turned up the heat to stay warm, and followed the map on my in-dash GPS. 4.2 miles down and a right at the gate that's usually left open by ranch hands. The meters spun out to 3.5 and there was no Toyota. Not a tail light, not a roadside hazard sign, nothing. The oil well, an old pump jack rig, stood still, rusted, almost solid, half buried in scrub. I shut off my headlights and coasted closer. The only illumination was the flicker of my flashlight and the ghostly reflection of my own headlights off the metal frame. I keyed the mic. Dispatch, be advised. I'm clear, no vehicle on site, over. No reply. I clicked to 16. Anyone copy on channel 16? This is Deputy Merritt. 1 bar of static danced across the speaker, then nothing. I sighed. This was one of those calls that seemed made up, just as likely to be a prank as a real breakdown. Maybe someone wanted to send a deputy out to an empty field. I scanned the horizon. Off to my right, the Guadalupe Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. To my left, a low mesa stretched into the night. No houses, no lights, just me and the rig. I eased forward and shone my flashlight at the base of the pump jack. A small pile of empty Thunderbird wine bottles huddled against the legs, dried-out stalks of grass pressed flat. I slid off my jacket and knelt to inspect. No footprints, just wind-blown gravel. I stood and let the beam sweep across the road, seeing those 2 tracks carved faintly into the dust, but they were fresh. A Toyota truck, all right, but where had it gone? I stepped forward on the uneven ground, and my radio suddenly buzzed. Merritt, why aren't you answering? The voice was quiet, strained, like someone breathing through an old gas mask. But I hadn't spoken since I quipped 10-4 earlier. I snapped off the mic and turned to my cruiser. The dash cam caught a flicker of movement behind the rig. Something crouched low. But by the time I swung my flashlight around, it was gone. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Texas heat or the fatigue of another night shift. I got back in and called it false alarm. I headed out, eyes glued to the road. As I rolled past the pump jack, I thought I saw headlights sweep past. Headlights moving too fast for a pickup, too low for a car, then gone as soon as I blinked. I hit the siren toggle briefly to see if it would rouse anything. Just a yawp of static. I turned back onto 90, heading east toward Toya. Every bump felt like a drumbeat in my chest as I watched the speedometer flick past 50, then 60. I kept everything in my sights, the right shoulder, the left ditch. I half expected a Toyota to materialize out of nowhere. Instead, I saw that stray dog again, on the shoulder, looking at me as if it recognized me. I kept rolling, but the dog's eyes caught in my headlights, blazing with a red glow, before he darted off into the mesquite. By now, it was 3:06 a.m. I was approaching the outskirts of Toya, where Farm Road 123 meets the highway. I remembered that last night Ortiz had mentioned odd chatter on Channel 3, an old channel no one used. So I switched the radio to monitor it, at first static. Then, a faint hiss, the girl, she's not there. It wasn't enough to make out every word, but it was in a whisper, as if someone were standing right at the mic. That'ers not a call we log. No one's supposed to be on Channel 3. I keyed up, "This is Merritt, identify yourself." Nothing but static. My ears throbbed. I keyed back, "Dispatch, 1077, over." No answer. I flicked back to Channel 16, dead, finished. I let out a breath, but didn't exhale it. My chest felt tight, like something was squeezing me from the inside. I parked under a broken street lamp by the north side of Toya, a place where the pavement is slipping into dirt, and hopped out with my flashlight intending to check my rig. That's when I saw the Polaroid, tacked to my windshield by some unseen hand. I bent forward and snatched it. In the photo was a little girl wearing a faded Childress Middle School hoodie. She looked to be about 12, eyes wide and empty. The background was a barn I recognized. The Lockridge Barn, passed off Highway 349 near Childress. My pulse clenched. I slid the Polaroid into my pocket and checked my cruiser's doors, locked. No footprints around the rig. No signs someone had been near. The barn in the distance stood silent, like a silhouette tracking me. I climbed back in, set the Polaroid on the passenger seat, and pressed on the gas. My headlights cut through the dark, and I turned on to 290, heading back to Van Horn Station to figure out my next steps. It was now 3:42 a.m. when I finally rolled into the station parking lot. Lights on inside, Sergeant Price's silhouette leaning over paperwork. I killed the engine and left the dash cam running. He looked up as I stepped inside. He asked if I was okay. I said, "Just saw something odd on my cruiser," and left out the part about the Polaroid. "Lot of pranks lately," I said, forcing a laugh. He nodded and handed me a folder marked "Missing Reports, 2003 to 2005. I felt my heart tighten. Those were the years we've had cold cases with no leads. I asked why those files were here, and he said they were requested by a ranger's office investigating an unrelated matter. For a moment I thought, damned if they didn't find me out. But I just nodded and took the folder without flipping it open. By 4 a.m., I was back in my cruiser, folder on the passenger seat, dash cam off. My head felt heavy like I'd hauled a sack of rocks. I turned south onto 90 again, towards Pecos, where my wife, Tammy, and kids would still be asleep. The radio was silent. The highway stretched on, endless salt cedar and dust swirling behind me. I glanced at the folder. The top sheet read, "Confidential." I tucked it under my arm. It weighed more than paper. I turned onto the access road for the Lockridge Barn, trail of taillights vanishing as soon as my headlights hit them. My glove-wrapped hand reached into my pocket for the Polaroid. The edges were dog-eared, ghosting a memory I didn't want to hold. I felt something shift in my chest, the dread settling like sediment. In that moment I felt watched. The roar of the engine, the scratch of the radio with absolutely nothing but static, the blur of mesquite, the unchanged gravel behind me. By the time I crested the small rise, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw those barn rafters carved into the sky, as if they were waiting. I pressed the accelerator without thinking, and the dust behind my wheels swallowed me. In my peripheral, something flickered, like headlights coming from the barn. Or maybe from nowhere. I didn't stop again until I reached the garage at home, where I killed the engine, took one last look at my cruiser's windshield to see if the Polaroid I left on the seat fell into the passenger footwell. It hadn't. I pulled the folder onto the passenger seat, pressed my keys into my palm, then walked inside to find the remnants of my family's sleeping breaths. I didn't tell Tammy about any of it, didn't mention the barn, the Polaroid, the missing flicker on the dash cam, that damned folder. I just stared at the wall and let the dawn's first light fill the living room. I sat on the couch and wondered if I'd ever get this sight out of my mind. A small barn, a little girl in a Childress hoodie, and that hush in the radio that said someone, something, was listening. And when I closed my eyes, I could still hear her. The girl, she's not there. When I think back on that first section of events, I realize that nothing happened suddenly or with fanfare. It was the accumulation. The missing logs, the stray calls, the Polaroid, the empty barn, that gilded every step with a sense of wrongness. I never felt safe that night. Not under that flickering truck stop sign, not at the pump jack, not even parked next to the convenience store in Toyah. The world had gone quiet, but it was a lie. Something high and hidden was listening, letting me believe I was alone when I wasn't. And by the time my shift ended, I was already too deep into something that would unravel me from the inside out. By the time dawn's light sifted through the thin curtains of our living room, I sat on the couch in a silent daze. Tammy and the kids were gone for the morning. She'd bundled them into the truck and driven them to her mother's house in Corpus, hoping I'd sleep through whatever haunted me. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept cycling back to that whisper over Channel 3, that cracked radio static, the sight of the Childress hoodie in the Polaroid, and the flash of headlights behind me as I pulled away from the Lockridge barn. I stared at the blank wall, willing my heartbeat to slow. When the clock ticked past 6:15 a.m., I shuffled to the kitchen, boiled coffee, and poured a steaming cup. The mug felt too hot in my trembling hands. I didn't file a report on any of the night's oddities. My sergeant, Price, would think I'd gone soft if I singled out whispers and missing logs. So I did what I always did. I logged the standard traffic stops, the calls I actually responded to, and tucked everything else away in my head. After quick breakfast, instant oatmeal for me, pancakes for the kids, I kissed Tammy goodbye and left for the station in a foul mood. I'd spent 8 years here, seeing enough dirt roads and drunks to last me a lifetime. But this felt different, like I was riding shotgun with something that didn't want to be found. That afternoon, around 2:30 p.m., I found myself in the bullpen, rifling through that confidential folder the Rangers dropped off. I'd hauled it from Toyah Station to Van Horn with every intent to flip through the files, though I barely recognized half the names. The manila folder had 7 case files tucked inside, 5 missing juveniles, 1 adult who vanished, and 1 unidentified body pulled from a ditch on US 385 in 2004. Each file had faded typewritten summaries, crime scene photos of cabins, barns, and, always, the same uniformed deputy in the background, face blurred but recognizable by the shoulder patch. Caldwell County Sheriff. I flipped to the first file, Lena Santiago, missing from Childress since October 2003. The report stated she was last seen near the county fairgrounds, her mother claiming she ran off with older boys. But I found notes scribbled in margins. Interview with Deputy Ortiz, October 19, 2003, 2:12 a.m. Subject uncooperative. Left photos on screen for El Santiago's mother, potential leads. Follow up on J. Harris, OD Diner. The scribbles looked like Ortiz's handwriting, but his name wasn't mentioned in the official chain of command. It was just Deputy, no badge number. I skimmed the next file. Martin de Leon, a 17-year-old found dead in a culvert south of Toya. In that summary, another scribble. Ditch off Ferrari Ranch Road. Cause inconclusive. Check deputy's tire tracks. OSP notified. And there it was again. Check Ortiz's logs. My pulse ticked upward as I compared ink to samples I'd glimpsed on his locker's paperwork. It was the same handwriting. I sat back, feeling the room spin. Ortiz's face flashed in my mind, his lean, dark countenance, his rare smile when we partnered. He'd shown me how to spot bootleggers on 67, warned me about heat stroke in the summer. If he'd been involved in cover-ups, I felt betrayal as sharp as a blow to the gut. I slammed the folder shut, shoved it into my coat pocket, and walked into Price's office without knocking. He eyed me from behind his desk, flicking ashes into an old styrofoam cup. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, brow arching. I crammed my chin into my chest. Different angle on those old missing teens. Looks like Ortiz was on more than just the occasional call. His eyes narrowed. "Be careful where you stir a sleeping rattler, Merritt." Those files were marked Ranger use only. I caught his meaning. I was already too close, but I needed answers. "He's missing too," I said. "You know that, right?" Price's jaw tightened. He dropped his gaze. "Check his house tonight. He never gave a heads up about extended leave. I figured he was on vacation." I nodded. My shoulders slumped under the weight of winter gear. I hadn't yet returned to the locker room. I left without another word. As I stepped into the hall, the 3 deputies exchanged glances, then shuffled away as I passed. By 3 p.m., I bailed on all administrative tasks and jumped in my cruiser. Had little appetite for boring traffic enforcement when the air felt hollow. I crossed town to Ortiz's small home on Hudson Street. A tidy stucco box with a dusty yard and a sagging fence. By 3:25, I tapped the door with the butt of my repo tool. No answer. I tried the door handle, locked. A quick scan revealed muddy tire tracks leading to the driveway, but the truck itself was gone. I checked the mailbox. A single utility bill lay inside. No forwarding address. I circled the house. Windows steamed from cooking or shutting off the AC. One bedroom curtain was drawn, but I saw no shoes near the door. If Ortiz was there, he wasn't coming out. I radioed dispatch. 10:23, checking on Deputy Ortiz's welfare at home. Logged as possible 10:41, but I didn't wait for reply. I ran the license plate on his pickup. No flags, still registered to him. That didn't mean much. Plenty of folks took extra long vacations and paid their tags on time. I let out a dry laugh and headed back to the station. Inside, I pocketed the manila folder and slipped into my office chair, pressing my palm to my forehead. I saw myself in the cracked surface of the laminated desk, eyes hollow, hands shaking. At 4:45 p.m., dispatch paged me for a stolen trailer. I tried to ignore it. I wasn't ready to face road calls, but protocol demanded I respond. I grabbed my notebook, baton, and firearm, then hopped back in my cruiser. I switched the dash cam on. It clicked to life with a tiny red light. I drove out Old US 285, the sun low, painting the horizon a bruised orange. The call said the trailer was taken from Eagle Ridge RV Park, a dingy lot just north of Odessa, a place with more tumbleweed than grass. I reached the site by 5:22 p.m. Trailer missing, no sign of forced entry. I snapped photos of the empty hook, jotted down witness statements from the lot manager, then walked inside a squat office that reeked of stale tobacco and hydraulic fluid. The manager, a pinch-faced old man with deep lines around his mouth, leaned back, eyes drooping. "You know this armpit used to be a stop for the old Owens Ranch rodeo? Now it's just bars and busted trailers," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They keep the roads slick with diesel, son. Easy to slip a trailer out of here without anyone blinking." I nodded, scribbled that down. Then I asked if he'd seen any unfamiliar rigs pulling in last night. He scratched at his neck. "One big Kenworth late last night. Plate started with B, Texas 8. Guy was real quiet, didn't even look up when he signed in." I asked Ortiz's name. That plate matched his company. The manager shook his head. "Don't know him, deputy. Denied any local ties." I left, feeling the walls close in. At least Ortiz's absence from his own property now seemed deliberate. By 7 p.m., the sky deepened into steel gray. I drove to the sheriff's office lot and backed my cruiser under the garage bay. I killed the engine, but the dash cam stayed lit. Cloudy static flickering until loaded into my laptop at home. In the break room, I gulped down lukewarm coffee and considered my next move. The hours ticked by until 9 p.m., mid-shift traffic when I prepared to patrol the Van Horn outskirts. At 9:10 p.m., I passed the old Abilene farm on Highway 90. Its front gate was chained, but fields lay fallow, choked with tumbleweed. That farm popped up in 3 missing person files from 2004. Reports said kids huddled in barns. One said a deputy saw a shadow moving at the east silo. I slowed, scanned through my cracked windshield. Nothing. No headlight, no barn door ajar. Just stale wind rustling a warning. I thumbed my flashlight, clicked it off. Felt like someone stood just out of reach. About an hour later, I got a call for a welfare check at a motel on the outskirts of Terlingua, 12 miles south. Caller claimed a family in room 5 heard screaming last night, but when housekeeping knocked, all was quiet. I didn't care for that motel. Old Prohibition relic, paint peeling, neon sign that buzzed in storms. Perfect place for someone to hide a secret. I reached the Desert Skies Motel at 10:29 p.m. The sign glowed a dim, jaundiced red. Desert Skies Vacancy. I eased my cruiser under the lone bulb by the office. The clerk, a gaunt woman in a wrinkled uniform, had empty sockets under her eyes. She told me room 5 was empty, but that weird things had happened. Couple said they heard a child sobbing and their TV flickered off, she whispered. She said she knocked, no answer, so she came to you, deputy. I nodded and followed her directions. The door to room 5 was shut. I put my badge to her chest and sniffed the air. Stale cologne, faint char smell. I rapped on the door, no answer. I keyed my mic. "Dispatch, I'm 1026 at Desert Skies, checking room 5. No response. I wrenched the knob, locked. I pulled out my spare key from the ring, Bobby fluorescent tag. It turned with a groan, and the door swung open on rusted hinges. Inside, the last occupants had left hastily. Bed linens tossed, half-eaten chicken sandwiches on the nightstand. A TV screen cracked diagonally. The only sound was the hum of the broken AC kicking on and off. I aimed my flashlight at the bed, pillow shredded, stuffing exposed. I moved toward the balcony sliding door, belligerent desert wind blowing in. I flipped the flashlight on the carpet, muddy footprints, too small to be an adult's. They trailed to the bathroom, leading to a small, flickering bulb. I flicked the light. Nothing but a cracked mirror and an empty tub. But on the sink ledge, a single note in childish scrawl. "I'm sorry, sir." No signature. My radio crackled to life. Merritt, you meeting with the Rangers at Alpine at 2 a.m. Confirm? It was Sergeant Vega, crisp and direct. I exhaled so hard I nearly gagged. Affirmative, I said. Then I scanned the motel room for any sign of the girl. No toys, no clothing, just that note. Something meant to be found. I left it pinned with a bit of Scotch tape to the door frame and locked the door behind me. By midnight, the sky was a vault of black. I drove back toward Alpine, my headlights at low beam cutting through patches of mesquite that cast long, spidery shadows. I crested a hill, saw the lights of Van Horn Station flicker in the distance. That radio, though, still dead on any channel that mattered. At 12:45 a.m., I pulled into the ranger lot beside Blue Mountain Road. 2 unmarked SUVs waited with engines off, shadowed figures leaning against the hoods. Sergeant Vega stepped out first, tall, lean, the brim of his hat casting his face into half shadow. He nodded to me without greeting. The other man, Agent Ruiz, stepped forward. Middle age, salt and pepper stubble, eyes the color of gravestone. They didn't look like folks who wasted breath. Vega's jaw was set. We pulled the dash cam and cruiser logs, Vega said, handing me evidence bags with my own gear inside. Found camera data showing a power cycling last Tuesday at 1:13 a.m. No recorded files. He tapped the bag as if testing the lid. We're imaging the hard drive now. We recovered a Polaroid from your cruiser seat. Same girl from the folder. Looks like they sent it last Thursday. My arms went cold. I tried to speak, but the words came out shallow. Ruiz unfolded a sheet of paper, handwritten coordinates. This barn, south of Ozona. Old Whitmore Place. Your missing files mention a barn there in 2004. My heart pounded. I don't recall that one, sir. He gave me a look. You drove past every barn in the county last year. We value honesty. I blinked. I must have glossed over it. Busy that night. He studied my face a moment, then dropped it. You drive us there. We'll meet you at the entrance. I felt entirely hollow as I slipped into their back seat. The ascent out of the lot was silent, except for Ruiz's soft snore of impatience. My cruiser was impounded, keys surrendered to evidence, so there was no radio, no dash cam light, just the long stretch of 285 ahead. We hit heavy silence until we reached the road leading to Ozona. By 1 a.m., we were rolling down a dusty pathway flanked by mesquite. Distant lights of Alpine winked off behind us. We reached the barn, a squat, gray-weathered structure, sunken foundation, rusted tin roof sagging in places. The walls were streaked with grime, rotted boards hanging like loose teeth. The place was unremarkable until I shone my flashlight at the door. Blood, dried, dark, on the latch. I felt bile rise. Vega paused halfway down the steps. Found this about an hour ago, he said, pointing to a Polaroid taped to the wall. It was the same little girl, eyes haunting. But this time she held a torn scrap of paper. They'll come for me. I pressed my flashlight against the barn's nails to steady my breath. The air smelled sour, like stale sweat and decay. I turned to Vega. How did you get this? He shifted his weight. Got a tip from family in Sonora. They said locals heard child's cries down here at night. He pointed behind the barn, a narrow board leaning against the wall. I pried it off. Rot crumbled at my fingertips. A slide of light seeped through the crack. A space barely wide enough for a kid. I dropped to my knees. The gap led just into darkness, but I saw footprints on the dirt floor. Tiny prints, half moon-shaped, pressing into hard-packed earth. They trailed to a jagged hole in the back wall, roughly patched with chicken wire and old stone. I crouched by the hole and poked my head through. Nothing but a narrow tunnel, 2 foot wide, walls of crumbled adobe. A slender wind stirred inside. I found fresh footprints and dust, barefoot. My flashlight beam revealed chew marks on a frayed blanket 40 feet down. My pulse hammered. Then a faint tapping, wood against earth, like a child shining a shoe against rock. The tunnel arced, turning left. Vega clicked on his light and stepped forward. "Merritt, you see that?" He pointed at letters etched on a block of stone. Lena S., followed by something scratched out. The name matched the first file in that folder. My breath came in short bursts. We pulled back, gave the barn a wide berth. Vega handed me a latex glove. "Take these," he said. I slipped it on, picked up the empty wine bottle someone left under a beam, and flicked it with my flashlight. It rolled, clinked into an empty bucket. I realized we needed to dig deeper, but by then it was 1:37 a.m., and neither of the rangers wanted to camp out for forensic analysis. Vega motioned to the pickups. "Let's wrap this up." We drove back to Alpine under a sky dull with clouds. My mind reeled. Ortiz's name, the girl's face, that note in Terlingua. Each piece clicked into a horrific puzzle. When Vega dropped me at the Van Horn station at 2:15 a.m., he slid a folder across the hood. "We're coordinating with Beeville PD. Someone's got the dirt on multiple sites, trailers, barns, old wells. They call it the Lost Trail. You familiar?" I shook my head. "You'll get a briefing tomorrow. Incidents span 2002 to 2008, all cold until now." He backed his SUV out, leaving me in the glow of a single street lamp. My cruiser still impounded, I squinted at the sign on the sheriff's office wall. "Service with honor." It felt like a mockery. I walked inside, nodded at Price's sleepy salute, and grabbed a cup of coffee from the break room. He asked if I found anything. I exhaled, laid the new folder next to the old one on the table. Motel room note, barn coordinates, that etching of Lena's name. He crossed the room, peered at both. "You're deeper than you know." I rubbed my temples. "It's bigger than Caldwell. Feels like all of West Texas is stitched together by bones." I didn't elaborate. By 3 a.m., I slipped out the back exit. No one noticed me. I drove home on 285, bare intersections and stray cattle grazing in road shoulder. My head sagged on the headrest. I fought to keep my eyes open until I pulled into the garage. I shut the door, climbed the stairs as quietly as possible, and stood before Tammy's bedroom door. I heard her even breathing, the kids' slow snores beside her. I thought about waking her, telling her I was trapped in something that wouldn't let go. But I didn't have the words. I walked to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and thumbed through the files again beneath a single lamp. Lena Santiago, Martin De Leon, Isabel Peña, Thomas Rios, physical descriptions, scribbled notes about interrogation tactics, reference to make them confess or they run. One page read, Officer Hutchins, possible link to dry drive-by 2004. Check for bullet casings in mobile home near Odessa. It was all there, impossible to deny. I let the folder drop from my lap. The lamp's bulb flickered, then died, like something blowing out a candle from across the room. Darkness swallowed me. I lay back, trying to steady my breath, but my mind raced. The child's tunnel in the barn, the motel note, the jumbled coordinates. Somewhere, right now, someone in a uniform was closing a door on a memory, sealing off a crime scene, crossing out names in logbooks. I felt panic for Ortiz, panic for Lena and the others whose faces I'd never known, but whose bodies I could almost see in those tunnels and fields. And I realized the dread I felt now wasn't just for the missing, It was for the truth itself, for the knowledge that some people carry darkness inside them and wear a badge over it as a shield. My eyes ached, heavy as river stones, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, listening for the radio to crackle, hoping that somewhere in the static I'd hear a familiar voice say, "Merritt, you get this. Where did she go?" And I'd be forced to answer, to face that hush that said, "I know what happened." But in the oppressive quiet of my bedroom, I heard nothing more than the soft whirl of the ceiling fan and my own uneven breathing. The night was far from over, and dawn would come too soon, and I'd have to get up and do it all again. Ride those roads, chase whispers, stare into barns and motel rooms as if I expected someone to answer. Because if I stopped, even for a moment, I would slip off the edge into the places that wanted to stay hidden forever. I forced myself out of bed at dawn, though my eyes still felt gritty, like I'd slept on sandpaper. The clock read 5:12 a.m., and I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the ceiling fan's spinning blades, trying to will my thoughts into silence. It didn't work. Every scrap of the previous night's horrors played behind my eyelids, Lena's name etched in stone, the damp chill of that barn tunnel, the motel note, Ortiz's empty house. My chest felt constricted, each breath hard to draw. I finally swung my legs over the side of the bed, feet meeting the cold hardwood floor. My uniform lay draped on a chair, starch soft, as if waiting for me to slip back into the life I'd once known. I picked it up and walked into the bathroom, voice hoarse as I rasped, "Another day, deputy." I splashed ice-cold water on my face, let my reflection blink back. Hollow-cheeked, weary eyes, 5 o'clock shadow gathering. I skipped breakfast. Coffee was a luxury discarded long ago. Instead, I grabbed that folder, files from Childress, Toya, Odessa, and slipped it into my jacket's breast pocket. I left the house before Tammy awoke, the sun still a faint glow on the horizon. The ride to Van Horn Station felt like a march into something that didn't want to let me go. My cruiser sat in the lot, impounded, but they'd returned my personal car after a cursory inspection. I climbed in and started the ignition. The engine's rumble felt like a lifeline. The radio crackled to life as I switched channels, static, then nothing. I exhaled through clenched teeth. At 6:17 a.m., I stepped into the bullpen. Sergeant Price glanced up over a row of paperwork, eyebrows knitting together when he saw me. "Late," he said, voice low. I shrugged. "Lost a few hours." "No point in explaining." He slid a mug toward me, black coffee, lukewarm. I sank into my chair, sipped, and felt the bitterness cut straight to my gut. No one spoke about last night's revelations. The other deputies exchanged glances, eyes gliding over me as if I'd become transparent. I shrugged it off and turned my attention to the desk. A fresh stack of reports, my patrol schedule, and a note pinned to the bulletin board. Rangers in Alpine, meeting Thursday 2 a.m. I closed my eyes for a moment, then grabbed my keys. By 7 a.m., I was rolling south on Highway 90 toward Childress. The 2-lane highway lay flat as a blade, mesquite lining both shoulders, silent except for my engine's hum. The sun peeked over distant hills, painting the sky with bruised purples and muted oranges. On my left, fields of salt cedar swayed. My mind drifted to things I couldn't unsee. The damp tunnel, the child's skeleton footprints in the dirt, that hut of bones in a hidden shaft somewhere on County Road 15. I gripped the wheel, knuckles whitening. I arrived at Childress Regional Station by 8:12 a.m. Deputy Galloway, a lanky guy with anxious eyes, met me at the door. "We got a lead," he said, his voice low, urgent. Rangers forwarded coordinates, abandoned trailer park on the edge of town. They want us to check it before the Rangers roll in tomorrow. My heart rate spiked. That trailer park, Lockridge, was where I'd nearly lost it last week. Show me. We drove in his cruiser, which smelled like stale coffee and burnt rubber. The roads out of Childress narrowed until they dissolved into gravel. By 8:45 a.m., we crested a rise. Rows of decrepit trailers, some with curtains drawn tight, others with smashed windows and doors hanging off hinges. An empty playground sat at the center, rusted swings swaying faintly in the breeze, a seesaw crusted with peeling paint. Everything looked half buried in dust. I clicked the visor up and peered into the nearest trailer's window. A sagging mattress, stained carpet, no sign of life. A single Polaroid lay on the dashboard, blinking up at me. I stepped out, heart hammering, and bent down. The little girl in the Childress hoodie, eyes empty, still pressing that same cryptic note, "They'll come for me." I felt bile rise. Galloway flicked on his flashlight and crossed his arms. "Thought they'd want to look first thing." I nodded, scooped the photo into a plastic evidence bag he produced, and scanned the trailer's exterior. Oh, someone had drawn chalk lines around footprints. One set small and childlike, pointing east. Another set larger, boot treads from a sheriff's 9mm holster, stopping at the trailer door. I felt a twist in my gut. Footprints matching my boots? No, those looked older, maybe a deputy's. "We need COFS and RPD on this," I said. "This is active." Galloway nodded, eyes flicking to a cluster of trailers at the park's far end. "Rangers want to check those too. Heard faint sounds at night, like kids crying." I felt every hair on my neck rise. I walked to the far trailers, boots crunching broken glass and rusted cans. I shone the beam under one. An empty beer bottle and a tattered doll missing its right eye lay in the dirt. My breath caught. The ground here felt different. Damp, almost marshy. I tapped the flashlight on the sole of my boot. A small indentation like a handprint pressed into wet clay. I looked up at the trailer's window. Curtains drawn inside, but a sliver of light peeked through. I crept forward, flashlight trained on the window frame. I knocked, lightly at first, then harder. No answer. I called, "Childress PD? You all right in there?" Silence, except a faint wind rattling the aluminum siding. I pressed my ear to the door. A soft whimper, like a child's sob. My heart bucked, and I reached for the doorknob. It turned on the first click. Inside was dim. Morning light filtered through cracked blinds. The air smelled sour. Urine, stale cigarette smoke, mildew. I swept my light across the room. Empty liquor bottles, discarded clothing, a mattress on the floor covered in dirty sheets. I saw nothing. Then, I heard a shuffle behind me, quick and low, like someone crawling on hands and knees. I spun around, flashlight tracing the floor. A narrow hallway led to a back room shrouded in darkness. I advanced slowly, each step stirring dust motes in the beam. By the time I reached the hallway entrance, I shone my light on a small pair of sneakers nearly hidden under a threadbare blanket. I flicked apart the blanket. Just a tattered teddy bear, stuffing oozing out. My breath trembled. No child, no footprints. Beyond the sneakers, I felt watched, and I wanted to run. A crackle on my radio snapped me around. "Merritt, you copy?" "Respond." It was Price. I keyed the mic. "Copy, 10-4. Situation under control." I forced a calm I didn't feel. Galloway joined me at the doorway, eyes wide. "Nothing. We get out of here?" he whispered. I nodded. We backtracked to the front door, flipping off the light. As I slammed it shut, I saw a shadow flicker across the window. Too tall to be a child, arms too long. I pointed my flashlight back, but no one was there. I felt my gut twist. We spent the next 2 hours photographing the rest of the trailers. Each one held small, disturbing clues. A child's drawing of a family, names scratched into walls, faint handprints on a crumbling wallpaper. My stomach churned. Finally, at 11 a.m., we packed up. I climbed into my cruiser, cradling the evidence bag with the Polaroid and teddy bear. I sent Galloway on his way, ordered him to wait for RPD and set up a perimeter. "Don't leave until CSI shows," I said. He nodded and peeled off. I strapped in and steered back toward the station, mind replaying every detail. Footprints, shadows, the crackly radio call. On the drive, I flicked through the files again. Lena's disappearance had almost the same timeline. 5 miles from a trailer park, 1 suspect deputy, no body. I bit my lip until it bled. I knew what I had to do, inspect that oil field next, the one where Benton Pierce vanished in 2004. Pierce was 19, a high school dropout working on a rig. Last seen, walking toward a well when maintenance went cold at 3 a.m. No trace. The file mentioned a shallow grave found near a pump foundation, but washed out in the next year's floods. "Revisit site," someone scrawled. "Check for fresh signs." I parked back at Van Horn by 12:27 p.m., dropped off the Polaroided evidence, and grabbed a lunch of cold fried chicken from a styrofoam box. Price found me in the break room, staring at a blank screen. He said, "Rangers want to meet at 2 a.m. tomorrow. We'll coordinate with Beeville PD. Don't go alone tonight." I nodded. My gut said it was too late for backup. Price gave me a long look. "Be careful, Merritt." I spent the afternoon filing paperwork, traffic citations, missing reports from the day before. My hands shook as I signed forms. By 4 p.m., I was restless. I strapped on my duty belt and walked into the Sallyport. My cruiser, the one they returned after a quick inspection, sat under fluorescent lights. I climbed in, flicked on the dash cam. The red light blinked steady. I eased out of the lot and pointed north on US 385 toward Odessa. Headlights at low beam, cutting through an already dim sky. By the time the clock read 5:19 p.m., I reached the scarred landscape of oil fields, pumping rigs leaning like skeletal arms rising from the earth. I turned off the engine and stepped out, crunching gravel underfoot. I navigated to the location marked in Pierce's file. An old well labeled Pump Jack 93, half buried by dunes and wrapped in caution tape that fluttered weakly in the breeze. The foundation was cracked, concrete chipped, and an oil drum lay tipped over beside a tangled pile of hoses. I flicked on my flashlight. Light stabbed the darkness. The air smelled of diesel and rust. I shone it on the ground around the pump. No footprints older than a year, but fresh tire tracks circled the rig. Truck treads matching something too wide for a standard pickup. I knelt, ran my gloved finger over the tracks. They pressed deep into soft dirt. Someone had driven a heavy rig here recently. I scanned the well's foundation, a rusted hatch halfway open, revealing a dark cavity below. I felt bile climb my throat. The hatch had been sealed years ago, but mud had loosened the bolts. I knelt and tugged at the edge. Mud crumbled. I leaned forward, shining my light into the gap. Nothing but darkness, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I thought of Pierce's file. Found shallow grave, decayed remains smashed flat by heavy equipment. I felt sweat bead on my forehead despite the chilly wind. I slid back and stood, wiping my palms on my jeans. Then I noticed fresh footprints leading away toward the south edge of the field. They were half-shod, bare toes peeking from torn sneakers, leading toward an abandoned service road. I followed them 10 yards until I reached a discarded lunchbox, battered and dented. I opened it. Rusted thermos, moldy sandwich, and at the bottom, another Polaroid. This time of a boy around 10, standing near that pump jack, eyes dull. I flipped it over, scrawled in pencil, "Find me." My heart slammed. The boy's hoodie matched code for Childress Middle, but it was 2004, the same age as Lena, same brand of hoodie. The hatch shifted behind me. I spun with my flashlight, nothing. I stepped closer and saw muddy handprints on the pump's leg. Someone had climbed in or out recently. My pulse thundered. I felt bile rise again. I snapped photos with my phone. Handprints, the Polaroid, the inverted hatch. Farther along the tracks was a crumpled orange work vest, Pierce's height, adult size too large to be a kid's. I bagged it as evidence. I keyed my mic. Dispatch, 1023 at Pump Jack 93. Silence, then, Deputy, copy. Noted. I exhaled and set my jaw. I had coordinates for one more site, an abandoned farmhouse off FM 207 near Toya, where a 16-year-old girl, Isabel Pena, vanished in 2005. I didn't want to revisit that hell, but I had to. By 6:48 p.m., I reached the farmhouse. 2-story white siding, paint peeling, windows boarded. I parked and strode to the front door. It swung open at my touch. No lock. Inside, yellowed wallpaper peeled in long strips, and floorboards sagged as if they breathed. Dust coated every surface. I shone my flashlight up the stairs. Footprints led to the second floor. I climbed slowly, each step groaning under my weight. In one bedroom, a small dresser drawer lay open, empty. I shone the light at the wall, scribbled in pencil, "Isabel, come home." Under it, another Polaroid. A teenage girl in a floral dress, standing in front of a pickup with a Tarrant County license plate. I picked it up, same dull eyes. I dropped the flashlight at the top of the stairs and called over my shoulder. "Rangers, if you're here, make yourself known." My voice echoed through empty halls. Nothing. I moved deeper. Each echo a promise of something unseen. In the living room, chairs lay overturned, a piano with broken keys. On the piano sheet stand, a notebook lay open, handwritten, dating back to 2005. Tried to run last night. He saw me. He said I knew too much. They keep me in his house now. He says they'll let me go if I keep my mouth shut. I don't want to die. My gut lurched. I snapped a photo. I slipped on the stairs and nearly fell. My flashlight hit the floor, and beam cut across the room, drywall caving in. Beyond, a narrow crawl space. My heart pounded. I knelt, peered inside. Wet straw, bits of clothing, small footprints and dust leading in. I reached in, touched soft fabric caught on a nail. I yanked a thread. Something gave. I heard a distant creak of floorboards above me. Someone else in the house. My mind screamed for me to run, but my boots felt rooted to the floor. I felt dread wrap around my spine like steel. Then, just a faint echo of breathing, hollow and ragged, coming from above. Not my own. I flicked off the camera and backed away, breathing fast. My shoulder bumped a floorboard, and the boring echo traveled up the walls. A door slammed somewhere above, close enough to make me bleed through the skin. I scrambled down the stairs, fumbling for the doorknob. I burst out into the dusk just as the front door slammed behind me with sickening force. My heart shattered against my ribs. I dashed to the cruiser, slammed inside, locked the doors. Above me, the farmhouse window lights went dark. I drove off recklessly, headlights blinding, thoughts swirling. By 7:25 p.m., I parked back at the station, hands trembling as I slipped the Polaroids and notebook into evidence. Price met me outside, face pale. "What happened?" he asked. I could barely speak. "Someone's house is a prison. We'll need CSI tomorrow. Locks changed." He nodded. "I'll call Beeville, see if they're live." I walked inside, every deputy's eyes on me like I'd brought something in. I sat at my desk, slid off my gloves. My hands shook, and I wiped them on my pants. I felt hollow, like someone carved out my insides and filled me with static. I picked up the phone, dialed home. Tammy answered, voice sleepy. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked. I forced calm. "No, but I found something big. We're pulling in CSI, Rangers, everyone." I heard her inhale sharp. "Be careful," she whispered. I closed my eyes, always. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark screen, eyes ringed with red, face gaunt. I thought about Ortiz, about the boys and girls whose faces I'd held in these Polaroids. Something in me cracked. I turned on the overhead light, pulled open the drawer, and found a small piece of paper tucked under a blotter, a scrawled message in pencil. "He's watching you." My breath caught. I ran my fingers over the letters. Loops and slashes matched the handwriting in the motel note and barn etching. A cold realization washed me. Someone in my department was feeding me clues, orchestrating the hunt. Maybe they wanted me to find these sites. Maybe they wanted me next. By 10 p.m., the station lay silent. Lights dimmed, most deputies gone home. I returned the Polaroids to the envelope and zipped it closed. I placed the envelope in my locker and snapped it shut. I stood in the empty hallway, cameras blinking overhead. I felt every pair of eyes, however unseen, tracking me. I turned back to the locker, pulled out my keys, and left without looking back. The radio on my cruiser crackled once as I exited. "Merritt, remember? No one comes back from the dark." I froze, heart pounding. I clicked off the ignition, lunged for the radio mic. "Dispatch, you copy?" "I'm leaving." I sat there in the driver's seat for what felt like hours. Maybe it was only minutes, I couldn't tell. The engine's hum slowly settled into silence, and the neon glow of my street lamp flickered once before, surrendering to darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that white-knuckled imprints pressed into the leather. I told myself I'd go inside, but something rooted me in place. The thought of looking at my wife's empty pillow, the void of my daughter's doll left on the floor, it all felt too heavy right then. So I stayed, headlights off. Just me in the dark inside my car, watching the door where my life used to be. Eventually, I reached over and locked the door, clicked the window shut, and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. I replayed every detail: the crashed doll in the motel room, the chalk outlines at Lockridge, the etched name Lena S. in that barn, the hand-sized prints on the pump jack, the siblings orphaned by silence. Each face haunted me, and I began to see patterns where there shouldn't have been patterns, almost as if someone had arranged these tragedies like pieces on a chessboard. I reminded myself that those notes and Polaroids seemed meant to lure me. But for what? Was I being groomed, tested, or punished for something I didn't even realize? I finally forced myself to unbuckle, stepped out into the cool October air, and closed the driver's door behind me with a thud that echoed down the empty street. The black sky above had thinned, revealing a scattering of stars that felt impossibly distant. I locked the passenger door and started walking toward the house, but only made it halfway across the driveway when my phone buzzed. My reflection glimmered on the screen, but it wasn't Tammy or the sergeant calling. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, half hoping someone would answer the line before it went to voicemail. Instead, the static hissed for 3 rings, then a single clear whisper, "You can't save them all." The line clicked dead. My stomach dropped like a stone. I took a shaky breath and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. Blocked. I jabbed at my phone settings, toggled airplane mode, but the bars stayed flat. This wasn't a dropout zone. Someone had jammed the frequency. The realization clawed at me that whoever sent that whisper could be nearby, watching me from behind the mesquite lining the driveway. I looked around. Empty, softly lit yards, no sign of movement. I swallowed hard and sprinted the rest of the way to the front porch. I fumbled with my keys, prying my jacket off and dropping it on the doormat. The house was silent, shutters drawn over every window. I locked the front door behind me, heart still racing. Inside, the hall light glowed dim. Shadows flickered across the walls. I saw my reflection in a framed photograph. Me, smiling at a date night 6 months ago, warm lamplight behind me. I rubbed my hand across the glass, and the chill of my apartment sank in. An arrow that punctured my chest. I took a deep breath, exhaled, then headed to the kitchen. The coffee pot in the corner was empty, stale grounds still in the filter. I shut it off and took a glass from the cabinet, filled it from the tap, and drank until my mouth burned. I looked at my reflection in the window over the sink. Dark circles, unshaven jaw, eyes that saw too much. I closed my eyes and let the cold water trace the hollows under my cheekbones. I walked back into the living room where the children's toys were strewn. My daughter's stuffed unicorn, my son's Hot Wheels cars scattered in a jagged line. I knelt and picked up the teddy bear fur I'd found at the trailer park earlier, its stitching frayed. I felt a handprint of memory crease into my mind. The sweat-slick forehead of a terrified girl. Voice cracking on a microphone somewhere in that desert. I pressed the fur to my face and felt tears sting my eyes. Tears I wouldn't let myself shed out in the open. This wasn't about me. I was the hunter, but I was also prey. I went into my office, bookshelves lined with binders of case files, trophies from high school football games. Photos of my kids wearing cowboy hats. On my desk sat the 2 folders. One marked confidential, with the names Lena, Martin, Isabel, Thomas. The second, a fresh Beaumont envelope containing motel notes, barn etchings, and teddy bear fur. I stacked them so the confidential stamp faced out. I tapped my fingers over the top sheet, the ink smeared slightly where someone had touched it. I opened the drawer and took out a small pistol, my off-duty piece, and examined it in the soft lamplight, checking that it was loaded. Each round felt like an answer in itself, a promise to protect, but also a vow burdened by regret. I slid it into my waistband, where I could feel the cold metal behind my hip. The house felt suffocating. Every creak of the floor sounded like footsteps behind me. I shut off all the lights and opened the front window just a crack, letting the night air rush in. Out front, the trees stood motionless, but I could swear I saw movement in the corner of my eye, an impossible sway that didn't match the wind. I slammed the window shut and locked it. By the time I climbed into bed, the sky had deepened to a velvet black, and the clock read 11:47 p.m. I lay on my side, facing the wall, clutching the pistol in my palm like a lifeline. I tried to close my eyes but couldn't block out the faces. My son's small frame in his bed across the hall, his breathing slow and steady. My daughter's doll, the one missing an eye, lying face down on the rug. I felt the knot in my chest tighten, as if someone had wound it with barbed wire. I flicked on the bedside lamp, illuminating a stack of bedtime storybooks that were never read that night. I pictured the way the barn looked in my head, the low ceiling of that damp crawl space, how the little girl must have felt trapped, crawling through darkness with only a thread of hope guiding her. I swallowed hard and pressed my eyes shut, praying for sleep. At exactly 12:04 a.m., I heard the faintest whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it. My head whipped toward the door, breath held. The whisper grew louder, like wind rustling leaves, but I recognized the words. "It's too late now." My hand fumbled to the pistol, but the whisper moved, half in my ear, half in my mind. They didn't deserve rescue. I bolted upright, lamp sputtered, and in that flicker I saw a shape in the doorway, tall, blurred, half hidden by shadows. The figure's head cocked to one side, and I could feel its gaze probing me. I aimed the pistol, but my hands trembled so bad that the shape blurred and vanished before I could pull the trigger. I bolted from the bed, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I kicked off the blankets and raced to the hallway, peering down at the children's doors. Both closed, lights off. Nothing but darkness behind them. I ran to the living room, fist slamming against the door. I needed to get out, to breathe, to find some flicker of sanity. But when I flung the door open, the night air that hit me felt wrong, too still, too thick, like I was breathing through pudding. I shut the door and turned the deadbolt. I made for the back door, but my phone buzzed in my pocket, an incoming text at 12:06 a.m. I stared at the screen. "Find them before he finds you." My breath caught. I felt bile rise again, but this time it was with anger. I thumbed block and deleted the message before thinking twice. I wanted to toss the phone across the room, but I didn't. Because however insane this was, I needed the device. I opened the front hall closet, grabbed my jacket, and swung it on. I slid the pistol into my pocket, then turned toward the door again. I swung it open and stepped out into the hallway, lights off, walls muted in shadow. I crept carefully, as if making my way through some tomb. I paused at the bottom of the stairs and flicked on the foyer light. Dust particles floated in the glow, as if the house itself exhaled. I thought I heard a creak from the second floor, like someone stepping on a floorboard directly above me. I whipped around, pistol raised, but nothing. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of the silence that followed. It stretched on, heavy and oppressive, like time itself had stopped to watch me. I descended to the living room, flipped on the overhead lamp, and looked at the children's toys. They sat exactly as I left them, still. I glanced at the front window, wondering if I'd see that shape again, but only streetlights spilled in, illuminating a deserted street. I exhaled and holstered the pistol. My pulse rattled in my ears. I needed a fresh strategy, a plan that wasn't just reaction and fear. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a yellow legal pad and pen, and sat at the table. I tapped the pen against the paper, listing all the sites I had visited. Marathon Truck Stop, Longhorn Junction, Deadman Pump, Lockridge Barn, Desert Skies Motel, Whitmore Barn, Trailer Park, Pump Jack, Farmhouse. Next to each, I scribbled names and dates. Lena's Barn, October 13th, 2012, Motel, October 25th, 2012, etc. I felt like I was mapping out a scavenger hunt of nightmares. I paused at Whitmore Barn and let my pen hover above it. That etching, Lena S., was smeared, half washed by wind and rain, but I could feel that name like a ghost standing in the dark. I dropped the pen and stared at the blank space. I realized that every location I'd been sent to held not only ruins of past tragedies but still open wounds. The girl in the farmhouse, the boy at the pump jack, somewhere in those scarred landscapes, the bodies or fragments remained, left behind by wind and vultures. And the same someone was controlling me, directing my steps. Whoever it was could be a deputy I trusted, Price, Galloway, maybe even Ortiz if he'd turned rogue. Fear battered my innards. I turned off the lamp and crawled into my own bed, empty, cold, but familiar. I tucked the legal pad under my pillow. My head hit the scratchy pillowcase and I closed my eyes. I listened to the house, every hum of the refrigerator, every shift of the drywall settling. Then I heard movement upstairs, soft, like a foot brushing carpet. My breath hitched. I sat up, my hand already on the pistol's grip under the pillow. The noise repeated, a soft shuffle over my bedroom. Footsteps. Not heavy, light, deliberate. I didn't dare make a sound. The footsteps paused right outside my door. I could feel the tension coil tight in my chest. I flicked on the reading light above my bed. Shadows leaped across the floor, streetlight through the window mixing with the lamp's glow. The hallway was empty, but the floorboards outside my bedroom door bore a fresh footprint. Bare, small, pressed into a layer of dust that seemed to have collected here no matter how often I cleaned. I shivered. That print matched none I'd seen. Smaller than a child's, narrower curve around the arch. I rubbed my palm over it, dust flaking off my fingers, and then I saw a second set of prints, these wider and wearing boots, mud caked in the treads. They stopped at my bedroom threshold. I held my breath. I slid off the bed, pistol drawn. The prints had vanished in the minutes I'd been sprawled on the mattress, but their impression remained, etched in my mind. Bare toes, a slender foot that had belonged to someone still too young to understand they were prey. The boot prints were from a deputy's uniform, no question. I thought of Price's face when I pressed him about Ortiz, when he warned me to drop it. I thought of Galloway's wide-eyed reaction when I mentioned jail cells and barn tunnels. Something inside me clicked into place. This had always been a setup, destined to draw me deeper, to break me. I backed into a corner along the wall, every muscle taut. My hearing was razor sharp. I heard the fridge's hum, the creak of the old floor settling in the next room, the faint rustle of curtains as the night breeze found gaps in the window. My finger nestled on the trigger. I waited and waited, until finally nothing but my own breath and a clock ticking on the mantel. At 12:37 a.m., I heard the closet door in my bedroom click shut, then silence. I eased out of the corner, pistol raised, and approached the closet. The door swung open without resistance. Empty, save for my clothes and a half-empty laundry basket sitting on the floor. I scanned the bedroom again. Windows closed and locked, blinds drawn, no sign of forced entry. Somehow, the intruder had passed through locked doors and vanished. I felt bile rise again. I reached into the laundry basket and found my crisp white shirt. Nothing unusual. But on top of it, someone had placed a small scrap of paper, a child's handwriting in pencil, barely legible under my lamplight. Thank you for helping me see the light. My eyes flicked to the closet, then to the scrap, and a hollow pit opened in my chest. I sank onto the bed, pistol still in hand, and pressed my head into my palms. In that moment, I realized two things. First, the child whose hand had written "thank you" was alive, still out there somewhere, but no safer now. Second, my own name was on a list of potential victims. This game had only one rule: follow the breadcrumbs or get lost in the dark. I closed my eyes, let tears slip down my cheeks, and counted the hours until dawn. I could not sleep, not with the memory of those footsteps in the hall and that note in my closet. The sun would rise soon, but the dark would haunt me forever. As I lay there, I whispered aloud what I felt in my bones. I will finish this, or it will finish me. And in the silence, I heard a breath, a ragged exhale, right at the edge of my hearing, as if someone stood just beyond the door. I held my pistol tighter, heart pounding, and waited for whatever came next. I lay awake for what felt like an eternity, grip tightening on the pistol until my knuckles burned. The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the window pane as if urging me to step into the night and face whatever I feared. But I remained motionless on the bed, eyes wide, listening to the creaks and sighs of the house settling on its foundation. Each faint groan from the floorboard sounded like footsteps in the hall, a reminder that I had nowhere to hide. Eventually, I forced myself to slide off the bed, pistol still in hand, and tiptoe to my desk. My lamp cast a dim circle, barely cutting through the darkness. I thumbed on my laptop in the corner, its screen a pale glow in the room. I didn't sleep, I knew I wouldn't. So, I opened the folder labeled Confidential and started scrolling through my notes one more time. Lena Santiago, age 12, vanished October 2003. Martin DeLeon, age 17, found dead near Toya August 2004. Isabel Peña, age 16, missing December 2005. Thomas Rios, age 19, disappeared February 2006, and one adult, Sarah Underwood, age 22, vanished near Marathon in September 2007. Beneath each name, scribbled footnotes about deputy involvement, unreported interviews, interrogation tactics, and sanctioned violence. Each line felt like a knife carving deeper into my gut. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. I thought of my own children, sleeping peacefully behind closed doors, oblivious to the darkness that had seeped into every corner of my life. A wave of guilt washed over me. My failure to keep them safe, my obsession with these cases that had cost me the most sacred peace. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of my desk and exhaled slowly, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. But the fear wouldn't subside. I had to move. I had to do something, anything, before the dawn brought more nightmares in daylight. I dressed quietly in my uniform, sliding my pistol into its holster, belt tight around my waist. I left my house at 1:52 a.m., locking the door behind me without looking back. The street was deserted, only the faint hum of distant traffic cutting through the night. I climbed into my car and shut the door softly. The engine purred to life under my hands, but I kept the headlights off, drifted onto the street, and rolled toward the station. The drive felt endless. My eyes flicked between the dim gauge lights on the dashboard and the black road ahead. My mind replayed every close call, the motel room where the note had been placed on the door, the Lockridge trailer park, and that chalk outline around a tiny footprint, the empty farmhouse filled with childlike scribbles, the pump jack site where the hatch had shifted as if someone had just climbed out. Someone was choreographing this dance, and I was the unwilling partner. I arrived at the sheriff's station at 2:07 a.m., the lot empty, save for the two marked cruisers that sat like silent witnesses under flickering street lamps. I parked in the far corner, slid out of the car, and locked it before heading inside. The building felt cavernous, corridors echoing as I moved down the hallway to my precinct office. I passed muted fluorescent lights and glanced into the break room, where a cup of coffee still sat half full beside a stack of stale donuts. Evidence that someone had been here not long ago. But no one was on duty. Every last deputy must have clocked out after an evening patrol. I let out a harsh breath and stepped into my office, flicked on the overhead lamp, and sank into my chair. I flipped open another legal pad and scrawled a single word at the top of the page. Tomorrow. I drew a line beneath it and wrote, "Coordinate with Rangers and Beeville PD at 2 a.m. Secure evidence sites, Whitmore Barn, Lockridge Trailer Park, Pump Jack 93, Desert Skies Motel, Childress Farmhouse, Underwood Campsite near Marathon." My pen hovered over the next line, but I stared at that word tomorrow as if it were a lifeline or a noose. I scribbled a note to myself. Find motive. Identify who sends messages. Protect my family. The lamp flickered and I tapped it. Must be a loose bulb. I stood, walked to the window and peeked through the closed blinds. The sky was an inky black, the streetlights faint in the pre-dawn darkness. Nothing moved. No shapes behind the mesquites, no dim headlights weaving toward me. I leaned my forehead against the glass, cold and unyielding, and closed my eyes. I felt utterly alone, as if the whole world had withdrawn, leaving me to grapple with terrors both past and present. At exactly 2 a.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. Beeville PD, Lieutenant Martinez calling. Rendezvous at Whitmore Barn in 30 minutes. Bring evidence. I thumbed a reply. Understood. I pocketed the phone and sat back down, heart thumping. My eyes fell upon the pistol lying next to my legal pad. I picked it up, inspecting the slide and barrel, reassuring myself that it was loaded, ready. I felt the weight of it against my palm, familiar yet frightening. I tucked it into the holster and stood, draped my jacket over my uniform and jogged back down the hallway toward the front doors. The station's main doors felt heavier in the dead of night, as if they knew I would walk back through them someday, broken. But for now, I was on a mission to uncover a grotesque tapestry of cruelty that had been woven through West Texas for years. I slipped outside and started the patrol cruiser, flicked on its headlights this time, and headed east on 90 toward Whitmore Barn. The road lay quiet, shoulders lined with mesquite and salt cedar. The air was crisp, carrying a faint promise of dawn. Still, darkness felt swollen around me, pressing against the windows like an old menace. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, recalling my previous visit, the bloodstains on the latch, the Polaroid taped to the wall, the boy's footsteps in the dirt leading into that narrow, crumbling tunnel. I shivered, turned the heat up, and sped on until I crested the final rise. At 2:28 a.m., Whitmore Barn emerged as a dark silhouette against the night sky. 2 unmarked SUVs from the Texas Rangers stood nearby, their headlights off, emergency lights silent. Lieutenant Martinez and a DPS Sergeant Morales stood outside the barn's entrance clad in windbreakers. Martinez was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, barely blinking. Morales was an older man with a weathered face and a salt and pepper mustache. Each carried a large flashlight and a duffel bag. I killed the cruiser's engine and stepped out, pistol still holstered at my side. Martinez nodded curtly. "Merritt, glad you made it in one piece." He handed me a pair of latex gloves. "We collected what we could last week, but we need a fresh look." He flicked the beam of his flashlight at the barn door. The latch was still blood-stained, old but unwashed. "We got a tip that someone was spotted around here last night," he said. "Wanted us to check for fresh traces." Morales stepped forward and handed me a small evidence marker. "Grip that, mark any prints or items you find, we'll document everything. Then we move on to the next site." Their voices were calm, professional, but I heard an undercurrent of dread, like they'd seen too much, yet there was still more to come. I clicked on my own flashlight and followed them inside. The wooden floorboards creaked underfoot. The air smelled sour, damp hay, mold, and something faintly metallic. Martinez shone his light across the front interior. Old farming tools leaned against rafters, a large hole in the back wall where boards had rotted away. I noticed newly scuffed footprints in the dust, half-bare prints that shifted deeper into the barn, mingling with older tracks. I dropped to my knees, pressed my gloved finger on one print. Small, slender, like a child's. Another print, booted, bigger, pressed hard into the floor, older, from a deputy's boot. My pulse thundered. Someone had been here very recently. I placed an evidence marker at the slender print and snapped a photograph with my phone. Martinez crouched beside me, aiming his camera at a different spot, smeared footprints at the base of a rotted beam. "Blood or oil?" he murmured. I dipped a swab in a small vial of presumptive blood reagent. It glowed faintly. "Blood," I whispered. My stomach roiled. I marked it with another tag. We moved carefully deeper. The barn's center held an old wooden post wrapped with animal wire. Possibly was a makeshift tether for horses once, but now it was pocked with nails and some scraps of cloth. Torn pieces of clothing, too small for an adult. Martinez collected a shred, placed it in an evidence bag. I ran the beam along the beam, scratch marks from fingernails, claw-like. I felt bile rise again. This had been a prison for someone, or something. The air grew colder near the back, where a chunk of the wall had crumbled. I knelt, flashlight between my teeth, and shone it into the hole. A narrow crevice led back into darkness. Morales clicked on his own light, peered inside. "Best we not go in there without a warrant," he said. "We don't know what's in there." I nodded. Someone was still using these tunnels, snooping them out for fresh victims or hiding old evidence. I took mental note to come back with excavation teams if needed. Martinez signaled me to follow him to the side of the barn. We stepped outside into the chill night. The wind had picked up, sending a swirl of dust through the broken boards. Martinez opened his duffel and pulled out a thermal imaging device. He scanned the nearby perimeter. Nothing. "If someone's still around, they're good at staying off-grid," he said. "But that fresh blood, this is prime. It's been less than 12 hours. I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. I'd seen blood here 2 weeks ago, fresh then too, but no body, no DNA. Whoever was behind this was careful, deliberate, and always one step ahead. We wrapped up, careful not to disturb any more prints. Morales marked the scene with crime scene tape. Martinez patted my shoulder. "Good work, Deputy. We're moving on to Lockridge." I climbed back into the Ranger SUV, heart pounding. We retraced my path back across those dusty fields toward the trailer park. By 3:45 a.m., we arrived under the same lone street lamp, where rows of dilapidated trailers rested like tombstones. Pepper spray bottles, empty cereal boxes, rattling window shutters, all silent and still. Galloway's cruiser idled in the far corner, headlights on, engine vibrating under his gloved hands. He stepped out as we approached, flashlight beam surveying the area. "Sir," Galloway said, "I found fresh footprints around 3 trailers, one in front of 5B and another circling 9A, both sets booted, but sizes differ. One looks like your boot, the other smaller, maybe a teen." His voice carried fatigue and relief at having backup. I nodded curtly. "Let's document it." I clicked on gloves, marked the small set of footprints with an evidence marker, then traced the boot prints. Each imprinted a different tread pattern, one wide and deep, something like a deputy's standard combat boot. The other narrower, as if from a kid's well-worn sneaker. I took photos, careful to capture the depth of the impressions, the dust kicked up around them. Martinez moved behind me, pointing his thermal scanner at the exterior wall of 5B. He let out a low whistle. Heat signature 2 feet above ground near the window. He shone his light there, a toddler's toy car wedged under the windowsill, still warm. I knelt, touched it. Warm. Someone had placed it there recently, nightmare fuel, put there to lure me closer. Galloway's radio buzzed. "Room 5B, empty. No sign of forced entry. I cursed under my breath. Martinez clicked off the thermal device. "We need to check inside." He eased toward the door, rapped on it twice, but no answer. I drew my pistol, slid around the side, and peered through the window. The interior was dim, morning light starting to creep in. I saw coloring books scattered on the floor. A small rusted tricycle by the wall, no sign of a child. I jabbed at the handle, unlocked. We slipped inside, boots light on linoleum. The air smelled stale, like room hadn't been aired in years. I swept my flashlight across the bed, pink sheets stained in places, a threadbare blanket tossed at the foot. Colors cast harshly under my beam. A stuffed bunny missing an ear lay on the pillow. I slid the beam toward the closet. A scrap of paper taped inside. Child's handwriting. They sent him to the barn next. My stomach clenched. Another clue, another link pointing to the barn I'd just left. I bagged it in an evidence envelope. Martinez took photos while Galloway checked under the bed. Nothing except dust and an empty food can. We exited quickly, hearts pounding. Outside, dust swirled in the dawn breeze. Martinez pulled me aside. We found tire tracks near 9A heading east. Looks like a heavy rig, maybe transport truck. Someone could be lying in wait south of here. I nodded, mind racing. If that rig had hauled someone away, the child could be in danger right now. We needed to close the loop, move fast to Childress Farmhouse, then Marathon site. At 4:12 a.m., we pulled away. The sky began to pale, but not yet dawn. I forced myself to focus, chase the next lead, hunt for remnants of the girls and boys who had vanished under the guise of runaways or voluntary departures. We arrived at the Desert Skies Motel before sunrise. The broken sign's neon lettering flickered in the dim light. Desert Skies vacancy. I parked beside Martinez, quickly removed gloves, and we crossed the parking lot. The room with the cracked TV screen, room 5, stood silent. I recalled the note. "I'm sorry, sir." I knocked lightly, then louder, still no answer. The door was unlatched. Inside, stale air, overturned furniture, the bathroom intact except for the note on the sink. I didn't want to be found. I snapped photos, bagged the note, but no sign of a child or blood. As we stepped into the hallway, I felt someone behind me. Footsteps, then a whisper, "Find them." I spun, nobody. My heart pounded so hard I tasted blood. Martinez flicked on his flashlight and swept it across the hallway. Empty, except for peeling wallpaper. "We're the only ones here," he said. His voice sounded unsteady. I didn't care. I just wanted to finish this, to save any kid left in danger. At 5:01 a.m., the sky lightened to a cool gray as we cleared the motel. Next was the Childress Farmhouse. We arrived on the back road off FM 123, tires crunching over gravel. The two-story White House loomed against the horizon, boarded windows, sagging front porch. I scanned the perimeter. No movement, no lights. Martinez, Morales, Galloway, and I fanned out, weapons drawn. I approached the door, which swung open under my hand. Inside, layered dust thick on the hardwood floor. I moved slowly, flashlight raised. On the piano, the open notebook lay exactly as I remembered. Tried to run last night. I don't want to die. I snapped photos, bagged the notebook. I peered up the stairs, no footprints since last time. But I noticed a fresh mark on the railing, smeared blood, still sticky. I pressed a swab. It tested positive. My heart stuttered. The kid had returned, or someone had been here since I was last here. I swept my beam along the second-floor hallway, closed doors, a faint tremor in the wood beneath my boots as the wind rattled the roof. I moved toward the master bedroom. I paused at the threshold. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and something fouler, like dried sweat and rust. I stepped in and swept my light across the bed. White, sheets slick with dried brown streaks. I crouched, placed a gloved finger on one streak. Dried blood. My stomach lurched. I backed away slowly, shone my light at the armoire. Its doors cracked open, clothes slung haphazardly inside, but a small picture frame on the top shelf caught my eye. I climbed onto the bed, platform creaking, and reached up. The frame held a photo of Sarah Underwood and her fiancé smiling on their wedding day. Wedding date September 2007, the file said. I tore it from the frame, dropped it in my evidence bag. My breath came ragged. I'd found Sarah's wedding picture exactly where someone wanted me to see it. They were toying with me, like carnival barkers luring me toward the next atrocity. At 5:47 a.m., I emerged from the farmhouse. The sky was a canvas of pink and pale orange, dawn breaking over the plains. I swallowed the lump in my throat, brushed dust from my uniform, and walked toward the cruiser. Martinez ushered me aside. The pattern's clear now. Child disappears, police files vanish, body concealed. Then an adult's wedding picture ends up in the killer's lair. They want to be found, or they want us to think we're finding them, but it's always bait. I nodded, voice tight. Make no mistake, I said, they're orchestrating us. Every clue is a lure. We've got one chance. Track them to the marathon site before they slip away. If we wait too long, we'll lose them again. We piled into the vehicles and headed back east on 90. The rising sun crested the horizon, washing the fields in a golden hue that felt unnatural. Too bright for what we were chasing. I gripped the steering wheel, gaze fixed on the road, haunted by the image of a girl's hollow eyes and a boy's smiling face frozen in a Polaroid. I thought of my own children at home, sheltered behind closed doors, safe for now, but no longer innocent. I clenched my teeth. If I failed today, they could be next. We arrived at the Marathon oil field in less than 30 minutes. The sun was fully up, heat already rising, a promise of a blistering day. Pump jacks bobbed rhythmically like mechanical metronomes, each arm lifting and lowering without pause. The air smelled of oil and dust. Dust devils spun in the distance, sending spirals of grit into the sky. I parked the cruiser a safe distance from Pump Jack 93. The area had been cordoned off with crime scene tape, but someone had ripped a section away, leaving the barrier alone on one side. I dead-bolted the door behind me and jogged to the scene. Martinez and Morales were already there, marking new footprints in the cracked concrete. I knelt beside them. Fresh prints, booted and childlike, but this time muddied, as if someone had dragged a child through a puddle before leaving the scene. The prints led behind the rig toward the scrubby bushes. I followed, heart pounding. Behind the pump jack, nestled in a shallow depression, lay a single ragged blanket, wet, threadbare. I shone my flashlight, a faint smear of blood on the corner. My breath caught. Someone had slept here recently. I marked it with evidence tape. Morales called out. Sonar operators got a signal in the old pipeline trench behind us. Something buried, not too deep. Could be Sarah's remains or the latest victim. I signaled to the others and we spread out, scanning the ground. I knelt, pressed my glove against the soil, freshly disturbed. I dug with my bare fingers, ignoring the grit under my nails. A splinter of bone caught my eye, tiny, darkened. I reached for a trowel one of the rangers handed me and carefully scraped away more dirt. Soon, I uncovered a small skeleton, curled in fetal position, child-sized. My breath hitched. I covered my mouth, blinked back tears. A ragged hoodie clung to the bones, Childress Middle School emblem still faintly visible. Lena. It had to be her. Martinez and Morales moved in, sealing the area and taking photographs. I stared at the remains, mangled by time, desiccated by the heat, but unmistakably a child's skeleton. I closed my eyes, touched the bones with my fingertips, felt the weight of her life. Stolen long ago. A single thought hammered in my mind. I had failed her. If I hadn't stumbled onto Whitmore Barn and Lockridge, maybe these victims would have been found sooner. But I also realized something else. By uncovering her, I was one step closer to the person who orchestrated these disappearances. I wiped the sweat from my brow, pressed my index finger to my temple. I thought of the notes, the whispers, the footprints that had led me to this exact spot. Someone had been guiding me here, leaving breadcrumbs. But why now? Why, after all these years? I scanned the area. Dunes of scrub, rusted pipelines, pump jacks turning endlessly. The land was flat, treeless, a dead flat wasteland, perfect for hiding secrets. I gathered myself, helped the rangers wrap the remains in a body bag. Martinez clapped me on the shoulder. "Good work, Deputy Merritt. We'll get her home. To her family." He said it as if it were a small silver lining, but I felt only hollowness. Lena being here meant closure for her parents, but it also meant the cycle of terror had reached its terrible apex. I turned away, head heavy. I saw more footprints leading back toward the pump jack's control shed, a set of boot marks and smaller prints. I followed them slowly, scanning the ground around me. A crushed soda can, a partial fingerprint on a rusted valve, and then something half buried in the dirt. Sarah Underwood's wedding ring, tarnished, still inside a band engraved with 092207. My chest seized. I picked it up, cold on my palm, and felt the weight of every broken promise laid bare. The ring had to be Sarah's, left here on the day her life was stolen. A single clue that spoke volumes. Someone wanted me to find her too. I dropped to a knee, ran the ring through my fingers. The world felt vertigo-inducing, the sun too bright, the wind too hot. I realized they'd left the ring here for me, to make sure I knew they could keep taking until the end of time. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I swallowed them hard. I jammed the ring into an evidence bag, snapped it closed, and rose to my feet. I surveyed the horizon. Nowhere to run, no place left to hide. I took a shaky breath and stepped back into the heat, determined to finish this. I flagged the photographers to pencil in the ring's location, then turned to Martinez. I said, "I want to dig here, get everything out. This place needs to be emptied out." He nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. "We'll call in excavation crews." He reached into his jacket, produced a business card. "Victim Services Division. They'll help coordinate tonight's resources." I tucked it into my breast pocket. I stepped away from the pit, feeling the radio inside my uniform pocket vibrate. I fished it out. Message from Price, time-stamped 6:15 a.m. "I found this under your windshield. Be careful." Attached was a photo. A Polaroid taped to my cruiser's windshield at the station lot, taken at dawn, my reflection captured behind the lens as I retrieved evidence that morning. Someone had been there when I was gone. I slammed the phone shut, hands trembling. "Deputy, you okay?" Morales asked. I forced a nod, wiped the sweat from my brow. My reflection in the ranger's SUV mirrored my shaking form, uniform stained with dust and blood, face gaunt, eyes haunted. I realized then that day would collapse into night soon, and I would return home to a house that felt like another crime scene. I exhaled, long and quiet. At 7:02 a.m., I climbed back into my car, pistol still holstered, Polaroids and ring in evidence bags by my side. The bones of children and the ring of a young bride, two sides of the same horrendous coin. I ignited the engine and pulled onto Highway 90, heading west toward Van Horn. The sun forced shadows across the empty plains. Scrub brush trembled in the heat. My mind felt fractured, but one thought held fast. I had to finish this. I needed to confront whoever had been orchestrating these disappearances from the shadows. As I drove, my radio crackled to life. Merritt, this is Martinez. Beeville PD is tracking an 18-wheeler moving south on 385. Plate starts with TX-5. Heavy rig, fresh mud, might be our next lead. Check it out. My pulse spiked. I grabbed the radio. Copy that. I felt the weight of the pistol at my hip as I shifted lanes and accelerated. Beeville PD was 2 hours south. The big rig might be carrying evidence or another victim. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer pounding on my skull. I drove on, roads stretching flat beneath me, horizons pale with dawn. By 9:30 a.m., I reached the intersection of 90 and 385. I turned south and followed the highway as it arced toward Odessa. My hands tightened on the wheel. Each mile marker flashed by, 120, 115, 110. I was closing in on that heavy rig, closing the loop in a terrible circle that had begun almost a decade ago with missing kids and silent files. I thought of Ortiz, partner turned phantom, and wondered if he'd ever been an ally or the first in a line of conspirators. The sun climbed higher, baking the pavement, sending mirages dancing in the distance. I forced myself to stay focused. This rig could be my only chance to see the killer, to put an end to this cycle. At 10:04 a.m., I saw it. A black 18-wheeler pulling a flatbed loaded with abandoned road signage, flagged oversized load. It had the right mud patterns. Thick clumps dried and caked on the rear tires, echoing the treads I'd documented at Lockridge and Whitmore. I rolled past, keeping pace in the next lane. My pulse thudded in my ears. I clicked on the cruiser's siren lightly, but only as a warning. The rig didn't slow. I tapped the radio. Dispatch, TX-51234 heading south 385, requesting assistance for traffic stop. No answer. I flipped to channel 16. Any units available for pursuit? Deputy Merritt attempting stop of 18-wheeler. IM plate TX-5-1-234 Beacon. Static followed. They were all tied up with the evidence processing, so I knew it was on me. I toggled the siren switch, low wail, and moved behind the rig. Its rig still had a battered plate on the driver's side mirror. TX-5-1234. I flicked the lights. Brakes squealed in protest as it slowed to 55 miles per hour. I floored the accelerator, pulled alongside the cab, and gazed in. A young man, dirt-streaked face, eyes dull, sat behind the wheel, glancing at me through a crack in the rolled-down window. He was about 22, too old to have been one of the missing kids, but that didn't matter. I keyed my mic. TX-5-1234. Pull your vehicle to the shoulder. Now. His gaze flicked to the side mirror. He eased the wheel and guided the rig onto the exit ramp. I followed, siren silent now, flashing lights blazing. We rolled to a stop on the shoulder beside a chain-link fence that led to a disused lot. He cut the engine. Exhaust hissed in the sudden silence. I stepped out, holstered pistol drawn. The man climbed down and stood motionless, knees locked, eyes scanning me with a hollow intensity. I felt a chill. This man's eyes looked empty, as if he'd been wrenched from life by something inhumane. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big that read, "Childress Wildcats." I signaled him to step toward me. He did so slowly, hands raised. I checked the rig bed. A massive tarp covered its contents, tied with ratchet straps. I reached his window, lowered my own, and said, "Name and vehicle registration, please." He cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Hank Salazar. Registered to Salazar Freight Lines." I watched his eyes flicker to a small Polaroid wedged under his windshield wiper. My reflection in uniform, tagged as 10:04. I nodded to it. "I'll need you to step out of the vehicle, Mr. Salazar." He turned and climbed down, sweatshirt hood falling back to reveal dark circles around his eyes. I noticed his hands trembled. I patted the side of the rig. "Papers, please." And he handed me a crumpled title. I studied it. Salazar Freight Lines, LLC. Print was smudged in places, paper worn. I handed it back. I lifted the tarp at one corner, enough to see. Inside was a large cardboard crate, sealed with duct tape. Whoever packed it had painted the crate red. I noticed a smear of something darked into the wood, but I couldn't tell if it was dried paint or something else. I slid my flashlight's beam underneath. A child's arm, thin, small, pressed into the corner of the crate. My breath hitched. I yanked the tarp back, feeling the room inside my skull collapse. A girl lay inside, curled into a fetal position, covered in a thin, filthy blanket. Her breathing was faint, shallow, like a dying animal. I sprung forward, crouched beside the crate, and yanked hard on a corner of the blanket. The girl's eyes fluttered open, brown, fearful, dim. I felt bile rise as I realized who she was. Isabel Peña, age 16, missing. I hit the intercom on my radio. "Dispatch, 1023, I have the girl. She's alive but in critical condition. Send EMAs and backup now." My voice shook with relief and rage colliding in my chest. The girl's eyes met mine, panicked, trembling with relief or terror. I scooped her fragile body into my arms, dragging her free. Her head lolled, and I caught her before she collapsed. She was limp, pale, and shivering. I pressed my uniform against her cheek, trying to warm her, to comfort her. I spoke quietly. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. We've got you." She looked up at me, tears streaking her dusty face, as I carried her to the cruiser. I laid her across the back seat, blanket around her shoulders, and stared at her as sirens finally approached. I reached in and gripped her hand, small, brittle. Her eyes locked on mine, filled with a sadness that no child should know. I promised her softly, "I'll make this stop. I swear I will." Her head slumped, and I pressed the siren full blast to life. I tore down the highway toward the Children's Hospital, every mile marker a hammer to my heart, every siren wail a confession of years wasted. At 11:15 a.m., I reached the emergency bay. Paramedics rushed out, pried Isabel from my arms, and wheeled her inside. I watched them fight for her life. 4 lines, monitors beeping, doctors working on her chest. I stepped back, heart aching, and looked at Salazar in handcuffs. The deputy who cuffed him offered a nod of sympathy. I studied the man I'd arrested. Dirty clothes, haunted eyes, sweat-streaked face. I remembered something from Sarah's file. Salazar was her boyfriend's cousin. Worked on oil fields in Marathon in 2007. Then he went missing. Then all the disappearances stopped. He'd resurfaced now, trafficker or killer, I didn't know, but he fit too neatly into the pattern. I watched as they wheeled Isabel into the trauma bay, doctors leaning over her. I exhaled, raw and ragged. The case wasn't over. 6 other children and at least 1 adult still vanished. but for the first time in nearly a decade, we had a living victim. I could hear her faint cries echo down the hallway, somewhere between relief and terror. I sat on a bench outside the room, head in my hands, and let tears blur my vision. At 11:58 a.m., I stood, wiped my cheeks, and walked out to the waiting room where family members would soon gather. I needed to update Martinez and Morales and coordinate the next steps: excavation at Marathon, interviews in Childress, arrests of any accomplices. I needed to move swiftly. My phone buzzed again. A text from Price. Found these in your locker this morning. Thoughts? Attached were photos of more Polaroids. One of me at the motel door, one of me digging at the pump jack, and one of me kneeling beside Isabel's settling body, tears streaking down my face. Someone had been inside my locker at home. Someone who could slip in and out of my private world as easily as they orchestrated the disappearances of children. I felt bile rise again, but this time it was swallowed by fierce resolve. I snapped my phone shut, pocketed it, and took a deep breath. I would finish this. I would protect my family. I would see every rotten branch of this conspiracy snapped off. But in that moment, I realized something that chilled me to my core. The darkness I hunted was inside me now. Each clue, each nightmare, had seared itself into my soul. I would bear these scars forever. I straightened my uniform, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the emergency bay, where Isabel lay fighting for her life. And as I stepped into the bright, sterile lights of the hospital hallway, I whispered under my breath a final question that lingered in the stale air. Who taught them the names of my children?